When I was around 12 years old, my family and I moved into a semi-detached house just up the street from our previous home. The house wasn't very big, and the floor plans for our part of the house were completely different from our neighbors. Our neighbors were a lovely little family of 4. Husband is from England, wife from Norway, which is where I live. They also had a 3-year-old little girl and a 6-month-old baby boy. Now, I love children, always have, and at that time, I really wanted to start babysitting. It's quite common to start babysitting at age 12, and I was turning 13 a month later anyway, so I wanted to find some small job. As we got to know our neighbors over the next few months of living there, my parents told the neighbors that if they ever needed a sitter, then it would be nice if they would consider trying me out. Seeing as it would be my first job as a babysitter, we thought it would be smart to start with my next-door neighbors, seeing as my parents would literally be on the other side of the wall just in case anything happened. Cut to a Friday night when my neighbors went to a party that was happening just down the street. I got there at around 8 p.m., and the parents told me that they would come home at around 2 to 3 a.m. Both kids were already sleeping, so they told me to just put on a movie and relax. These kids were the easiest to babysit ever. Once you put them to bed and they fell asleep, absolutely nothing would wake them up. They are some of the heaviest sleepers I've ever seen, so babysitting them was usually pretty uneventful. I was on the couch watching Avatar in the living room on the 2nd floor. The kids had their own separate bedrooms that were just downstairs where the front door was. I could basically see their bedrooms from where I was sitting, as the place was quite small. Because of the hallway, I couldn't see the front door. Again, this house was very small, so as long as the TV wasn't on too loud, then I could hear everything that happened downstairs. At around midnight, I heard the front door unlock, and my neighbors walked in while talking. I heard them close the door, and I heard them start taking off their jackets and their shoes. I thought it was a bit weird that they hadn't called to let me know that they were coming home early, but I just assumed that it must have slipped their minds, so I went downstairs to greet them. I could hear them talking up until the point that I came around the corner to the hallway that led to the door. There was no one there. The talking fell silent the second that I turned the corner. The only sound was from the TV upstairs. My heart started beating so fast, and my head was rushing. I ran to the bedrooms and checked the kids before I searched the rest of the house. I opened every door, checked every cabinet for anything that would explain what had just happened, but there was nothing there. The kids were still sound asleep. Eventually, I convinced myself that I was just imagining things. I checked the kids one last time and made certain that the doors were wide open so that I could see them from upstairs. I sat down to finish the movie whilst trying to process what had just taken place. But when I sat down, I noticed that the TV had been shut off, even though I had left it on. When I turned it back on, there was just snow on the screen. I couldn't for the life of me get it to work again. That's when the talking downstairs started up all over. Not only that, but the baby started screaming bloody murder. This baby never woke up from naps, and definitely wouldn't ever scream the way that it did that night. I have never in my life run down a staircase as fast as I did then. I rushed toward the baby's bedroom, only to find the door closed. I ripped it open, picked the baby up, and rushed to pick up his sister. I took them both upstairs and held those kids for almost 3 hours before the parents came back home. The talking and sounds downstairs came and went as I had the kids with me on the couch. I held them as close to me as I could and tried my best to help them stay asleep. As the parents came home, I was too scared to walk downstairs to greet them. I couldn't be sure if it was even actually them or not until they walked up the stairs where they found me clutching their children. Obviously, they noticed that I was upset and asked me what had happened. I honestly felt like I had lost my mind at that point, but I told them the story anyway. After I was finished, they told me that it wasn't the first time anything like that had happened there. Apparently, they heard voices all the time at night. I was kind of mortified that they didn't think to warn me before, but they said that they were sorry that this had happened to me, and the mom walked me home to my house. I slept with the lights on for almost a month after that. Believe it or not, I did go back and babysit those kids again. This is a story from my life that I've told to people, especially teens, to warn them to never use a Ouija board. When I was a senior in high school in 1989, my brother came home from college on spring break and told stories about him and some friends using a Ouija board. It had done some things to freak them out, so we dug out the one that we had in our attic. I don't know why we had it or where we got it from. He showed me what they had done, but nothing happened to us. I brought it to a friend's house and we tried it out a few times over the course of several evenings, and then about the third or fourth time, it really started to pick up in its responses. We had been starting by knocking 3 times on the corner of the board and saying something like, "Come, spirit," or something to that effect. Anyway, the marker really started to move around the board and spell things out. I always tell people that it was either our subconsciouses or a spirit moving it around, because I was certain that neither of us were moving it intentionally. With a light touch of a few fingers from each of our hands, it would just move around on its own as if it had its own personality. We would ask it all the usual questions, test questions, and curiosity ones. One day, though I wasn't a fan of it, my friend asked the board in which years we would each die. It spelled out something like 2040 or 40-ish for my friend. I don't actually remember the number, just that it was far into the future at the time. And 1990 for me, which was the next year. I asked, "Does that mean that I'm going to die in 1990 and my friend in 2040? No, it said. Then I asked again, this time switching the years around between us. Yes, it said. We asked the spirit about itself. It claimed that it had died the year my friend's father was born, and said that its name was Stephen Crane. We kinda laughed at that part. Of course, I looked up some dates about the author after that, but things just didn't seem to jive. I just thought, well, it could be another person with that name, and moved on. We started to invite other friends over to watch, who are all entirely skeptical. By the end of the evening, every single one was freaked out. More and more friends would come each night until we started getting a huge group of people. The board would answer plenty of test questions wrong, but then, for example, while everyone's reacting to the wrong answer and half paying attention, it's spelling out, "sorry." Another time, for example, in a lull between activity while people were distracted and chatting, it moved slowly to S, then kept circling around to H, until it came to a stop there. There was nothing else for about 2 minutes. The entire room of people was completely silent, and then it slowly moved to OK. It said a bad spirit had passed through the room. Once again, everyone freaked out. It didn't like this one friend, and every time he entered the room, when we had those gatherings, the marker would twist and move to the opposite side of the board. Other things like that happened. Again, it was like it had its own personality. I remember a few times driving home with that thing in the back seat of the car, terrified, with my heart pounding. One time I asked it, "Where will I go to college?" It spelled out one of the schools I was applying to, and then 37. I asked it if I was going to go to that school and get a 3.7 GPA the first semester, and it said yes. I was sure all along that my friend was not moving it intentionally, but I had proof, because one day he was really disturbed and frustrated with his girlfriend, a friend of mine. He had suspected that she was cheating on him, and he asked the board a question about her while using it with a friend, and it told him to turn on the TV. The video for the song, "What You Don't Know Might Hurt You," by Exposé, was playing on TV. I remember that he really took that to heart, and it affected his trust in their relationship. I always knew that he wasn't just playing around with the board, and that was a sort of hard proof to that fact. We started to actually use the board with our friends, but it only worked when one of us two used it with someone else. We asked the spirit why that was, and it responded that the spirit was inside my friend and that I was the owner of the board. Freaky stuff thinking back on it now. But as an 18-year-old, you think differently. Anyway, the enthusiasm started to peter out after a few months, maybe near the end of the summer, and I don't really know what happened to the Ouija board. I did end up going to that college that the board mentioned, but it didn't really catch my attention. When I got home for my first semester after 1990 had just begun, I got my grades, and had a 3.7 GPA. I don't remember if I made the connection or not, but I certainly did when the next thing happened. Around the same week or so, maybe even around the same day, I got the annual catalog that my college sends out, with articles and updates and whatnot. I opened it up, and there, right in front of me, was an entire article about Stephen Crane. He had gone to my college for a while, and I never had any clue about it. I remember having chills. Finally, the sad part is that later in 1990, after returning to college classes after Thanksgiving break, my friend, one of my best friends, died suddenly and unexpectedly from a heart problem. I don't know when I made the connection with the board, because by then it was over a year later. But at some point, I did, and when I did, I started to put the whole storyline together. It sank in more how creepy and dark the whole thing was. I am happy in life, very blessed. I did go through a form of spiritual growth some years ago where this darkness was left behind, and the story of my past doesn't haunt me. I share it in the hope that it's helpful for others. But I would never touch a Ouija board again, and would strongly advise against anyone else using one. To this day, I'm still positive that it was not our conscious action at work, but either our subconsciouses or truly a spirit. Whichever of those you might believe that it is, nothing good comes from playing around with either one of them. At the minimum, negligence can open up a path for psychological and emotional problems. At worst, relating with a spirit can let in a darkness and fear beyond your understanding or strength that can tint your life and affect you for quite some time to come. In the fall of 2019, I started babysitting for a new family. They live in a house built in the 1920s. I've always believed in angels and demons, not necessarily just ghosts. One of the first times that I was babysitting the 3-year-old and the 1-year-old, I was putting them to bed and I thought that I heard someone knocking on their front door downstairs. I looked out the window to see if the parents were home, but there was no one there. I decided to just ignore it. Another time, again, I was putting them to bed, and I heard what sounded like a man and a woman having a conversation in the kitchen. Again, I looked to see if the parents had just gotten home. They hadn't. Another time, I was watching them during the day when the mom was out of town and the dad was at work. I expected him home around 3:30. The girls were napping upstairs, and I heard the kitchen door open and footsteps. I was surprised the dad was back so early. As I turned the corner to go and greet him in the kitchen, I saw what I thought was him, black suit and all, walk past the door frame. I entered the kitchen and started to say, "Didn't expect you back so early," but there was no one there. The last time I ever babysat them, I was playing in the backyard with the girls. Let me remind you that the oldest one is 3. She is constantly scared to be alone or in the dark, which I thought was strange because usually at such a young age, kids haven't had any experiences to make them this frightened. She said to me that day, "I saw Slender Man in my bathroom mirror, and he waved back at me." I was terrified. I asked her to repeat what she had just said multiple times. Slender Man. She is 3. There's no reason for her to already know what that means. At that moment, I realized that I had always closed her bathroom door just because it felt creepy. And when I would come back to the room later, the door was always opened. I've never babysat for them again. This is a long one, but this is a true and factual story about my experience. I'd like to start by saying that I'm very skeptical when it comes to things people claim are paranormal. I don't just jump to conclusions that a strange event is caused by spirits. But some things I just can't wrap my head around or explain. I won't say that what happened to me and what I experienced was from a spirit, because I don't know 100%. All I know is that I'll never touch a Ouija board again, or be around one, because the experience disturbed me for the better part of a year. Also, I'd like to add that this is only one of 2 paranormal events that I've ever personally experienced that I can say 100% that I don't know what happened. Here we go, starting with the background. I used to think that Ouija boards were a load of crap. I still kind of do. I really don't know how I feel about them anymore, actually. I always saw them as a party game for gullible people, so when my friend Joe, not his real name for privacy, told me that he had one, I just laughed it off. I had only known Joe for about a year or so after meeting through mutual friends. He lived in a small apartment with his girlfriend Lisa, also not her real name, and their dog Vincent. At the time I was only 18. Joe was like 23, and Lisa was 20. For a period of time, I used to go over to their place every weekend after work because Joe bought me alcohol. So one night we were hanging out, and Joe starts talking about some strange encounters he had growing up and how he, quote-unquote, attracted spirits his whole life or some garbage. I smiled and nodded to be polite while he went off on paranormal tangents and started talking about shadow people following him. He then goes into his room and pulls out a Ouija board, but not the one that you get at a store made by a toy company. It was made of real wood and hand-carved. It was actually pretty nice. He said that he had gotten it as a birthday gift from his parents years ago because of his obsession with the paranormal. I didn't inquire as to where it had come from or who made it, but like I said, it looked handmade. While I sat there laughing and joking about it, Lisa chimes in and says, "Joe, tell him about the other night." Joe proceeds to tell me how him and Lisa allegedly spoke to a demon using it, and the demon claimed that his name was Beelzebub. Me being a big metalhead at the time, he got my attention. "Let's do it. Let's try to talk to this demon," I said, half joking. Joe asked if I was sure that I wanted to try it, and I agreed. So we went into his room. We turned off all the lights in the apartment. Lisa lit candles all around the room and we sat on the floor. I was nervous, but I was having fun watching Lisa and Joe's pageantry. It was spooky. I looked over at Joe and he seemed unsettled. I asked what was wrong, and he said that he wasn't feeling right. He didn't like the doors open displaying the darker areas of the apartment. Him and I got up and closed every door in the place, as in every room and every closet. We sat back on the floor and Vincent, the pup, laid on the bed. And we began. I forgot to add, this is very important. Before we started, I told Joe that I was skeptical of someone using their fingers to push the planchette around. So we all agreed to just use the back of our fingernails to touch it. Imagine just slightly bending your finger and placing the surface of your nail on the top. That's what we did. That way, even if you added pressure, your finger just slipped around on the planchette and didn't actually move it. We also made a rule. If the planchette moves, everyone has to lightly scratch the planchette with their nail to prove that none of us were the ones making it happen. What it looked similar to is placing your 2 fingers on the table and acting like they're legs and running in place. I hope that helps you get the picture. No one was able to move it on their own. We tried several times to ask if there were spirits with us, and got nothing. For about 20 minutes it continued that way. I told Joe I wanted to ask for someone in particular. Is John Smith here with us? Can John Smith talk to me? John Smith, obviously once again not his real name, was the name of my best friend's dad who was killed in a car crash while driving home from a fishing trip. That was when it moved, and it was absolutely insane. It felt like a great force just came to life in the planchette, like it had a mind of its own. None of that gliding around the board crap that you see in movies. This thing felt like we were holding onto a person's hand who was tugging and pulling. It was strong, but articulate movement, and it spelled out, hello. I asked him if he was John, and it spelled yes. I asked him to prove it, and it spelled out the name of my best friend. I asked him where he was when he passed, and he spelled Lake. I had chills down my spine. What I thought was just going to be fun had turned into being emotional and scary. Joe and Lisa knew nothing about John Smith. I never mentioned him or brought up anything about the circumstances, so they couldn't have known. I began to grow very unsettled. I told Joe and Lisa that I didn't want to talk to John anymore, so they told me to push the planchette to goodbye or whatever it was. I called it a night after that, but I wanted more. Next night, I was back. Same routine. John and Lisa set up the room. John closed all the doors. Vincent was on the bed. Lisa said that she wanted to talk to her grandma, so we did the process. It was the same incident for her as it was for me. Memory is kind of fuzzy, but it spelled out I love you, and also spelled out some sort of inside joke that she used to share with her grandmother. Lisa was in tears. As with me, I had no info on her grandma, and Joe wasn't that cruel to make her cry as a joke. I felt powerful. I think we all did. I felt like I was finally a believer, that we had an actual way of talking to spirits. The possibilities. But then, it happened. After the incident with Lisa's grandma, we were all kind of in shock. Joe was comforting Lisa, and I was speechless. We regained our composure and got back to it. This time we were asking the normal, are there any spirits with us? What usually left the planchette lifeless suddenly kicked in with great force. Scary force. The planchette moved violently around the board. We all kind of laughed nervously. We asked, who are you? The planchette shot to the moon symbol. If you don't know, this allegedly means a dark spirit. We all looked at each other, and then simultaneously moved the planchette to goodbye. As soon as we did, Vincent jumped up and ran off of the bed. He sat and stared as if looking at someone. We had that door closed before. Joe jumped up and said, F this, and ran into the kitchen. Lisa and I followed. Joe about nearly had a panic attack. He rushed to turn on all the lights. I've never seen him act that way. We were all pretty scared. We don't know what happened, but we had that door closed, for sure. After some talking and calming each other down, I left. I didn't sleep that night. I had never seen anything like that. After that night, I felt like I was being followed constantly. For almost a year, I slept with the lights on. That year ended up being one of the worst years of my life. I fell into a depression and was incredibly paranoid. I just couldn't shake the feeling that something was always watching me. I continued to go to Joe and Lisa's place occasionally, but we never touched the board again. We ended up having a falling out some months later over unrelated drama and never communicated after that. Like I said, that year was horrible for me. I started drinking a lot and tried to get over the feeling. I always felt like my energy was being sapped, like the air was heavy, and I struggled to find joy. The depression was real. Then the experience hit a peak. I was sleeping one night and woke up in a panic. I couldn't breathe. I felt as if someone was literally sitting on my chest. I gasped for air. Suddenly, I felt like what was someone grabbing my feet and trying to pull me off of my bed. I instantly went into a struggle, trying to kick out as hard as I could. Then all at once, it stopped. I was horrified. Nobody was in my room. I lost even more sleep after that incident. I ended up finally getting a hold on my life. I started going to the gym instead of drinking and wallowing in my pity. I started meditating instead of playing video games. After that year, it all went away. It was like I was free from that negative energy again, and I have been fine ever since. That's the story of my Ouija board experience. I'm still not sure if all of it was in my head, or if that night was just some sort of stress-induced panic attack, but whatever it was, I cannot explain it. People have told me that demons thrive off your energy, and that is what might have happened, but I'm just not sure. Perhaps it was the demon talking to us all along, pretending to be our loved ones, if such a thing exists. I'm just glad that whole experience is in my past. I'll never touch a Ouija board again, though. This encounter happened in the summer of 2006, when I was 20 years old. I didn't get my driver's license until January of that year, and driving opened up so many doors for me that I took a lot of solo road trips from my friends' houses in New England and the mid-Atlantic states. I also looked young for my age, and was often mistaken for a high school student in my early 20s. I was driving alone on I-78 on a random July day on my way to visit my friend in southern Pennsylvania for a long weekend. Her parents were away, and we had the house to ourselves and were planning on drinking and hot tubbing, watching Planet Earth drunk. It had just come out. Maybe run around some cornfields at night. I was so excited and had a great drive listening to good music, and it was a beautiful day. Right after I crossed the border from New Jersey into Pennsylvania, I stopped at one of the rest stops to get gas and snacks for the last part of my drive. I have tried to figure out which rest stop this was and can't ID it, but it was a gas station with a large mini-mart. Opposite the gas station was the on-ramp back to I-78 West, and parallel to the on-ramp was a dirt road, which comes into play later. I was heading into the store when a man in his late 30s, early 40s approached me. He was a stocky guy, definitely tall, I'm 5'1", and had on a plain black tee and jeans, with dark brown hair and a mustache/goatee. He had come out of a black pickup truck parked a few spaces away from my car. He had a super intense gaze and immediately creeped me out. He just had a crazy energy about him. I didn't really get vibes from people that often, but this was so strange. He stood too close. His gaze was crazy direct or focused, and his word choices were strange. It immediately set off all my alarms. He asked if I was from the area, despite my Connecticut license plate, where I was headed, and if I knew of anything fun to do because he had plans later and time to kill beforehand. He invited me to go play mini-golf or watch a movie with him. I didn't answer any of his questions, declined his invitation to hang out, and told him I didn't know the area, and walked away toward the store. I was blown away that he had asked me to go anywhere with him. It was so random and uncomfortable. As I was walking away, he actually screamed out, "You're gorgeous," and the volume and tone made my hair stand on end. It was super aggressive and inappropriate, and he even startled a family who was walking out of the store because it was so loud. I didn't turn around, but went inside. He came into the store shortly after, and was staring at me, so I went to use the bathroom and stayed in for at least 10 minutes texting my friend about this creep. When I came out, he wasn't in the store anymore, so I took my time buying drinks and snacks, and went out to gas my car up. I was relieved that his car was gone, and started thinking about the rest of my drive, and again getting excited to see my friend. When I pull up the road to get back onto the highway, I hear someone persistently honking his horn, and see this creep show on the dirt road parallel to the on-ramp in his truck, honking, shouting, and waving at me to drive over in his direction. He was directly facing the gas station and had been waiting for me. I immediately freaked out and jumped on the on-ramp back to I-78. He pulled out onto the highway after me, and I called my friend, extremely scared. I drove so fast, and probably dangerously, and looking back, I'm lucky that I didn't either get into an accident or pulled over, but I didn't know what else to do. He didn't follow me for that long, and I think after a few exits, he pulled off. My friend and I had a backup plan that if I saw his car again, she would direct me to a police station the next town over from her house instead of my going directly there and leading some freak to us. I didn't see the car again and continued on my journey, but the last few hours of my drive I was extremely tense and anxious. I remember checking my mirrors regularly for this black pickup truck. It all ended well. I got to my friend's house safely and we had a lovely weekend. The encounter was definitely creepy, but over the years, I didn't put much thought into it. A few years ago, in 2014, I was talking with another friend who is big into serial killers, and mentioned my encounter jokingly, suggesting that this was a serial killer I had met, and told her my experience. She was fascinated, and wanted to Google active serial killers in the Pennsylvania area at the time. The first hit was for Adam Leroy Lane, and he looked almost exactly like the man that I had met back in 2006. Obviously, it could be my mind filling in the blanks, but the basic characteristics, 40, tall but stocky, brown hair with a mustache, goatee, and the time and area, all match. In my memory, he was a little bit slimmer than the pictures, and it was 2006, not 2007, when he was actually convicted of murdering women. Still, it's an odd coincidence, and one I have definitely never forgotten. I was 19 years old and a trainee manager for Sainsbury's, a UK supermarket chain. I was working with a colleague on the shop floor, looking down the aisle. I saw a 30-something-year-old mother pushing a very severely deformed child in a wheelchair. Although I wasn't aware then, but since have become aware that the child had probably been born with hydrocephalus, leaving its head distended with fluid. The child also only had one arm, and was sort of curled up in the chair as if pained. As they passed us, we pulled our restocking trolley out of the way, and just as they were adjacent to us, the child let out a terrible sort of howl. To be honest, it left me shaken for several minutes. 2 or 3 days later on the weekend, I was invited to a party at a friend's place. Just a quiet meal and drinks with a few people that I knew. After food and a few drinks, the girl whose flat it was suggested that we try the Ouija board that she had recently bought. I was a total skeptic of the Ouija, although agreed to play for a bit of fun. It was a proper sort of wooden painted board, although there was no pointer, just a small crystal glass that those playing put their finger on. After about 20 minutes in, I thought it felt a bit odd the way that the glass felt like it was gliding so smoothly over the board and actually spelling out some of the responses to questions, and even claiming to be a local spirit of our town. We carried on for a while, and, although weird, nothing about the responses were threatening or unpleasant. My friend turned to me and said, "Ask it a question that nobody here or anyone else would know the answer to." I thought for a few seconds and spoke aloud. I was thinking of the child in the store, and I said, "What did I see at work the other day?" I felt the glass move under our fingers, and it said quickly, very positively, "Effing evil troll child." I felt physically sick, and was actually heaving. I jumped away and fell onto the floor. I then blacked out for a few minutes, resulting in my friends calling an ambulance in panic. When it arrived, I had calmed down a bit, and they just checked my vitals and left. My friend drove me home, and although I was all right, I had nightmares involving that child for several months. Today I believe that there are definitely consequences to messing with that sort of stuff, and it is absolutely best left well alone. That was over 25 years ago, and I remember that incident as if it happened just yesterday. I was babysitting one night for a family friend about 4 years ago. I had put the kids to bed and crashed on the couch while waiting for my mom and the friend to get back from a night out. Randomly, I woke up and just remember being very confused about why I was even awake. That was, until I heard the front door close. A key thing to note here is the fact that the only sound was the door closing. There was no sound of it being locked, and this lock was very loud. I assumed it was my mom and her friend coming back, so I sat up, preparing to leave. However, I quickly noticed the lack of their voices. They are never quiet after a night out, especially because the friend always has some drinks. And I also noticed that there was only one set of footsteps. For a moment I considered the possibility of it being the friend's husband coming home to grab something. He is a firefighter and was at the station for one of his 24-hour shifts. I could hear the person walking around the front room and then going to the table in there and shuffling through papers as if frantically searching for something. The more I listened, though, the more it just didn't feel right. I pretty quickly dropped the idea of it being the husband and jumped to the idea that it was an intruder. Being around 15 at the time, I was in no way brave enough to confront any intruder that broke into the house. I barely managed to scoot along a wall leading to the front room before becoming completely paralyzed by fear. I ended up promising myself that I would keep my presence hidden until the person walked upstairs to the kids or back toward me. I could hear them pacing around a lot, papers and items being shuffled through. Eventually, I heard the footsteps start to come down the hall before turning into the bathroom, which was before they could reach me or the stairs. Only seconds after the footsteps walked into the bathroom, I heard the front door unlock. This ties back to the beginning because it really stuck out that the door was never locked, and I can remember every single sound from the second that I woke up. Immediately, I heard my mom and the friend talking loudly, and part of me was relieved, while the other part of me was prepared to hear them screaming upon finding an intruder in the bathroom that was too small to hide in. Shockingly, they just walked straight past it, and my mom told me to get my stuff so that we could go home. I was still listening the entire time, and the bathroom door never closed and no further footsteps were heard. As I finally walked down the hall to the door, I scanned the bathroom. The door was wide open, the window was shut and too small to fit anyone but kids through, and there was nobody crouched in the darkness. There was absolutely nothing off about the house. No windows open in any of the first floor, and nobody left between my mom coming back and us leaving. Nothing. I'm a skeptic. I like to think that this may have been an intruder, but I cannot think of any logical way that they could have hid in the short minute that it took for me to walk by, nor did they have an escape route. The friend never found an intruder or noticed any missing items. Nothing makes sense. All I know is that night is vividly ingrained in my mind, too vividly to be a dream, and I still get that feeling of something not being right when I think about it. I was sleeping the other night, and I remember waking up, or rather so it seemed, yet it still felt like I was dreaming. I was lying in bed and remember sitting up and seeing 3 figures standing in my room with a dimly lit blue light coming from somewhere that illuminated them. I don't remember exactly what they said, or rather he said, because the one in the middle was speaking directly to me. I remember his mouth opening in a very inhuman way, with the jaw extending further than it should be able to. Their mouth and eyes were black. Not like solid black, but a smoky type of black, so sort of gray. But you could still recognize teeth and such. I remember them saying something about them coming in a few days, but I don't remember what it was exactly. I then remember passing back out and waking up, actually waking up, and seeing some dark form dart across the room and hover directly over my bed. My bed is in a corner, so it was sitting or hovering between the wall and I, with about a 4-inch gap at the top at the time. I then felt a very, very intense sensation of dread and heaviness throughout my entire fiber and being, and recall feeling this for a few minutes while it was just sitting there with my back turned to it. Then, out of nowhere, a sense of euphoria and great peace came over me. No longer did I fear or dread anything, but rather I felt happy, at peace, loved. I don't really know how to describe it. I remember that thing, whatever it was no longer there. I'm not religious, but I am spiritual in the sense of believing and following my own route when it comes to what happens after human death. I believe in a very unique form of reincarnation, in which the soul, essence, energy, consciousness, whatever you want to refer to it as, travels until it finds a new place to call home, and it could span across the entire universe. That being said, I couldn't help but feel like there was actually an evil presence there with me in my room, and a guardian angel, or some other known source of good energy, cast it out. I was around 12 when I had gotten a babysitting job with a family across town. The family was new to the area and just recently bought the house next to my best friend's place. My first day over was to get familiar with the kids and the house. The parents stayed and evaluated me and of course answered any questions that I had. I spent my time playing and keeping the children occupied. It was a boy named Devin, age 4, and a girl named Cameron, age 7, so I had my work cut out for me. Cameron wanted me to go to her room so she could show me her toys. I followed her up the 2 flights of stairs, but as we came to the top of the stairs, I felt strangely lightheaded, and the hair on my arms rose up. I had an intense feeling of being watched, like there was someone else up there with us. I tried to ignore the sensation and continue with my duties of finding Cameron's favorite doll so that we could go back downstairs. At the end of the day, it was decided that I was a good match, and I was to come back on Saturday morning. As I headed home, I couldn't shake the feeling that I got from that upstairs. I told myself, it's nothing, and I brushed it off to just being in a new place and unfamiliar surroundings. That Saturday morning, I showed up to a busy home as the parents tried to get out the door and show me the last-minute things that I needed for the day ahead. The kids were up in their PJs eating breakfast and already talking to me about all the fun things they wanted to do. After the parents left, I ushered the kids off to get changed. As I was cleaning up the breakfast dishes, I heard a loud bang come from the dining room. I ran back into the room and found one of the false ceiling tiles had fallen from its place. Puzzled, I tried to put it back, but it was not an easy task. After some struggling, I managed to fit it back in, and thought to myself, how could that have fallen out on its own? The day went on, and now it's close to lunchtime. The kids are watching TV, and I'm in the kitchen making something for lunch when I heard another loud bang coming from the dining area again. I look, and sure enough, the same tile was on the floor. This time I left it for the parents to see when they got home. Maybe they can fix it, I thought. Now the kids wanted to play hide and seek. We started off with Cameron seeking, and myself and Devin hiding. As Cameron started to count, we scurried around trying to find the best hiding place. I found the downstairs bathroom to be the best place for me. It was easy enough for Cameron to find me, and I hid Devin close to me so that I could keep an eye on him. As I entered the bathroom, I closed the door quietly behind me. I walked a few steps into the room and was now facing the mirror. As I was looking at my reflection, I also noticed something behind me that was moving. It was the closet door directly behind me, slowly opening. The closet door opened halfway and then slowly closed again, all by itself. I had the same feeling come over me like I did when I was upstairs on my first day. Wide-eyed with fear, I turned to the bathroom door and ran out. All I could think was, what just happened? I was really starting to worry that this house was haunted, and I now had every horror movie that I had ever watched playing through my head. Now I'm finding that I'm really uncomfortable, but I decide it's best to keep occupied. I break out a board game for us to play on the living room floor. Hungry Hippo, I think it was. We were playing for around 20 minutes before I noticed something again out of the corner of my eye, moving. I turned my head to see what it was. A child's shoe was tumbling across the floor all by itself. The kids stopped and watched in confusion. I was in disbelief. Cameron let out a scream and she ran for the door. I grabbed up Devin and followed. We went to my friend's house next door and told her mom everything. I'm not sure if she believed me, but we stayed over there until the parents got home. When they showed up, we told them what we saw. I don't think they believed me either. I showed the panel that fell out. Apparently it's been an issue since they moved in, and as for the rest of my accounts, they chalked it up to an overly active imagination. I know what I saw and what I felt. I wasn't imagining anything. I later found out a bit of history on the house. Apparently, a man died in the house after a heart attack upstairs in a room above the dining room where the paneling kept falling out. I think that his spirit is still in that house, and that maybe he was just trying to play with us. This happened about a year ago in a park near my house. My brother and I are very spiritual and believe strongly in this type of stuff. I had this one Ouija board for a few years now, gifted to me by my old stepdad. We decided to use it one night and got in contact with a ghost. It went pretty well, and we did it again a week later. We talked to a new ghost, and the ghost from the first time. It was pretty cool and insane to experience something so real. They were very nice, and we were very respectful since we take this stuff seriously. Toward the end, we asked that they would not follow us home and that they would let us leave. They agreed, and we said goodbye. They moved the planchette, therefore they said goodbye with us. It seemed to be all going normal when we left, until my brother started noticing a weird feeling in our home, and on top of that, he said that one day he was hanging out in the living room and felt something in the room with him. It was on the couch where he was sitting, and he could see a cabinet door that he left open in the kitchen. He asked out loud that if someone was there to please close that cabinet door, and they did. After I got home, he told me this, and we busted out the board again. I know that you shouldn't use the board in your home, but I felt like we needed to know what was going on. We asked if the ghost who was in our home was the ghost from the park. The planchette moved to yes. Fast forward a year today, and we still live in the same house. We have a few experiences with ghosts and spirits in our home, but never the one from the park. Plus, I never go to the park anymore. My question to you guys is what made this follow us home? We did everything we were supposed to do, had a very friendly encounter, and they moved the planchette to say goodbye. I read that that's usually all that you need to do, but we did all that, and it still didn't work. I don't believe that the ghost was negative or evil, considering that they just left our home after a while. Or at least I think, since I don't feel them here anymore. My brother is convinced that the ghost was messing with us, since during the conversation when we asked their religion, they just muttered out a bunch of nonsense. I guess that could be it, but I'm wondering if there could be another reason that they followed us home. When I was about 15 years old, I was a very curious teenager. I had only heard stories of the Ouija board, but had never actually tried it. So one weekend, my best friend slept over, and we decided to take our chances. My mom was super against me buying one, and she would have killed me if I would have brought one into her home. So my best friend and I took a big poster board and made our own Ouija board. We lit candles and turned off all the lights. It was about 1 a.m., and everyone in the house was asleep. When we started out, it was slow, but then the planchette started moving all around the board. I was convinced that my best friend was the one moving the piece around, but she denied it, and I trusted her not to lie. We asked how they died, and they just said, sick. After a bunch of other questions, we asked, how can you prove that you are who you really say that you are? They responded with, cemetery. I don't fully remember all the questions that we asked, but I know that it led to Charlie giving us some details. He said that his gravestone was by a path and a tree, small, round, with the year 1820. My mom's house is literally right across the street from a cemetery. I can look out the window and directly into it, so we are very, very close. It is an extremely old, historical colonial cemetery dating back to 1690. The next day, my best friend and I went over to the burial ground and started our wild goose chase for Charlie's headstone. Lo and behold, we found it. It was exactly as he described. His headstone was cylinder-shaped, the name Charlie was listed, and he was born in 1810 and died in 1820. Behind the stone was a huge tree, and it was right next to a pathway. I could not believe that the Ouija board actually worked. After discovering Charlie's grave, my best friend and I would sit and visit him every day after school. We would go hang out there when we were bored. Sometimes we would just sit next to him, smoke cigarettes, and talk. Maybe Charlie was just one lonely kid and wanted some friends. So that's what we gave him. The scariest thing that ever happened to me came from the person closest to me. My ex-husband and I were both only 19 when we married. When we first met, everything was glorious. I moved in with him and his family because me and mine were having a lot of trouble at the time, and for the first year, all was golden. Then one day, his stepdad went missing. The police found his body almost a week later, murdered. The tragedy tore through the three of them, Nikki, his mother, and sister, with an intensity similar to a massive hurricane. If Nikki's biological father had been present, that might have been one thing, but that piece of human excrement was not just absent, but only made the occasional appearance to steal one of the kids' social security checks from the mail on arrival, and that was usually when he knew no one would be home. When Fiona married Dave, he had become their father. The only father they ever really had. He was their true family. After the homicide, Nikki's whole personality shifted toward darkness. He would rant and rave like a man possessed, and become violent if I didn't do everything he told me to do, no matter what it was. To this day, I have scars from a physical altercation with his sister on being commanded to attack her and having no choice but to do so, for example. The scars make me who I am now, a survivor, but I wouldn't wish what I went through on anyone. Being terrified for your life every single day and never knowing if any given moment could lead to your last is exhausting and traumatizing to say the least. One day we got into it so badly that I told him I wanted to divorce. He kicked me out of my own car at my parents' house and tore out of the driveway, spraying gravel everywhere and leaving puffs of dust floating up toward the sky. I was utterly distraught by the entire situation at that point, completely at my wit's end. Yet for some reason I still loved him, still wanted to make things work out, and for us to be together. So when he called and begged for the chance just to talk things over, of course I agreed, and went outside to anxiously await his return to pick me up. I expected him to have calmed down by the time he arrived. At least, that was what his tone had suggested over the phone. But when I got in the car, the whole vibe felt off, chaotic. The tension was almost physically too much to handle. We rode in silence for about 5 minutes before he shot me a quick glare and then returned his attention to the road. His dark eyes drilled right through me, their anger giving off a certain glint like that of coal. "You know you're my wife, right?" he asked in a syrupy, sickly sweet voice. "That means you belong to me." I didn't really know how to respond, so I said nothing. My mind turned 1,000 miles an hour, deciphering what he was telling me, though. His level of possessiveness over me had steadily increased in the past 6 months or so after Dave's death, as if he were terrified of me disappearing along with the glue that had held together his tiny little broken family. My subconscious screamed at me that the whole thing had been a ruse, a trick to lure me back into the car. I looked down at my hands in my lap, wringing them together until my knuckles turned red. "I thought you wanted to fix things," I said. He smirked, and my gut went cold. My worst fears confirmed in that twisted, psychotic expression of his. "What do you think this is?" he replied. "It feels like a trick," I told him. He pursed his lips together, his grip tightening on the steering wheel. His shoulders tensed, and his expression grew more malvoyant than ever. "That's because it was a trick," he murmured. "If I can't have you, no one can." Until the moment he said those words aloud, I always thought of that expression as one of those you only ever hear or read in fiction. It never occurred to me that there was a reason that it existed. Someone, or many others most likely, who had heard the phrase and felt the sheer horror that accompanied its implication. In the course of our relationship, I endured punches, kicks, 2 totaled cars, and multiple death threats. A couple of weeks after this incident, I finally managed to get away from him for good. I stayed the night at a friend's house after getting what little things I needed. She lived not far from his grandparents, but I didn't really think anything of it because the neighborhood is one of those upscale, quiet, safe kind of suburbs. We partied most of the night. She went upstairs to sleep around 1 and left me on the couch in the living room watching TV, willing myself to pass out. About an hour later, around 2 a.m., I felt like someone was watching me. I looked over at the sliding doors to my left that led out into the backyard, and there he was. He was standing outside, in the dark, in the rain, watching me and crying with his fists clenched. I felt my eyes grow wide, and I sank slowly down into the leather cushions as if they could make me disappear from sight. I don't know how much longer he was there. When I looked again, he was gone. The next day, my mom came to get me, because he wrecked my car, so I no longer had a ride. He was standing at the corner staring at her as she drove past. We had to get a police escort to take us straight to the station to get a restraining order. I spent the next year getting the divorce straightened out and getting the rest of my belongings that he was trying to hold hostage, like my birth certificate, diploma, and social security card. I spent the next 6 years, even after entering into a wonderful and truly loving relationship, in fear that he would come for me. Even now, 8 years later, sometimes he will still try to contact me through other people or fake accounts on social media. Sometimes the most unsuspecting person is the one you have to worry about. Sometimes all it takes is one tragedy to twist a person completely inside and turn them into a monster on the outside. This happened 30 years ago when I was about 13, 14 years old, and me and an older friend were babysitting for a 6-year-old girl and her younger brother. We had been told that sometimes the girl complains about seeing a ghost man in her bedroom and upstairs at night, and that he comes out through the attic door. Now, I didn't believe a word of it. Kids are weird and say weird things. We get the kids ready for bed, but they wouldn't settle. The girl said that she felt scared, and her little brother started crying. She asked if she could sleep in her mom's bed until she got home. The little brother wanted to go with her. So I tucked them in and told some silly stories and laughed until they were both tired. Both kids were virtually asleep when we left. Door ajar, hall light on. An hour later, we're sitting downstairs watching The Equalizer, and all was good. Kids were definitely asleep, as I had to sneak past their room to use the bathroom. I had a quick peek on my way back, and aside from the little brother snoring a bit, everything else was quiet. I go back downstairs, and we watch TV a bit more. About 20 minutes go by, and out of nowhere we hear banging. Heavy, heavy banging, and the kids are screaming immediately. I run up the stairs, and meet the kids as they're running out of the room. More banging, and this time I have eyes on the kids, so I know that they're not making the noise. The kids fly at me. I grab the little brother, and we rush downstairs into the front room, shut the door, and all crash onto the sofa. Everything is silent apart from the TV, which I switch off. We sit in silence for about 5 minutes, just sorta holding each other. After a bit, the girl, with tears in her eyes, just says in a matter-of-fact way, the man was angry because she wasn't in her own room, so he tried to push over a wardrobe, and then he started thumping the wall. This event has stayed with me all these years. Let me start this off by saying that it is imperative that you stay off of the deep web. No matter what anyone tells you, no good can come from using it, and I am about to inform you as to why. I was 15 at the time. I had come home from school on a Friday afternoon ready to relax, kick back, and enjoy the short break. I had started using code about a year prior. Nothing too fancy, just basic Python, Java, HTTP, etc., and was practicing it daily. Now, I had known about the dark web before this took place. I would sometimes buy weed off of it, but that was about the extent. This particular day, however, I decided to venture further and really take a look at the dark web. I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with the iceberg diagram representing the internet's content. For those who don't know, the surface web contains about 10% of the internet's content, while the deep and dark web take up over 90%. I was ready to see what it really held. I heard stories about what goes down on the deep web, murder, inhumane torture, etc. But I didn't really believe that they were all legit. So I hopped on Tor and began to see what I could dig up. I started off by going on the hidden wiki and browsing through various websites, most of which contained illegal things such as drugs, hackers, and hitmen for hire, and lots of CP. I clicked on a random forum link, which took about a minute to load. I wish I could remember the name of it. It was a forum where people could pick a topic that they wanted to talk about, such as politics, dealing with mental health, etc. I noticed one of the topics was a pedo forum, and I don't want to even go into detail on what I saw there. There was one particular one that caught my eye. The link was all in red, while the rest were all black. It said, "Not for the weak, enter at your own risk." Curious as to what this was, I click on the link and it brought me to a forum that had only one other link on the whole page. I clicked that link and it brought me into a chat room. I realized that nobody was saying anything in it. only sending links. This set off alarm bells in my head because I had an idea of what was on those links. I wish that I had listened to my gut feeling, which was telling me to close out while you still can. However, the ignorant, curious teen took over me, and I started setting up some protection for myself using the code that I had learned. I later realized that this amateur coding I did would not protect me from these advanced people with malicious intent. I clicked on a random link and a page loaded surprisingly fast. It looked to be another chat room. I went to type hello or something, but it wouldn't let me. I sighed and began moving my mouse to go to the previous page when a noise went off. I had received a chat. The message said, "Hello, new user. I see you have found my site. Would you like to continue?" I tried typing again, but I still couldn't. The next message sent chills down my back, and my hands were shaking. It read, "No, son, not the keyboard." I tried turning off my computer, of course, but nothing worked. Another message popped up saying, "I guess I'll take that as a no." The screen suddenly changed, and a video began playing. It was a black screen, but I could hear a deep male voice say, "Unfortunately for you, you do not have a choice." I grabbed a sticky note and put it over my webcam, and the voice on the screen said, "Ah, so we're playing games now, huh?" The video then began to change, and I realized the man was taking his hand off the camera. He was a short man, maybe 5'7" tops, but that brought me no comfort. He held up a knife and said, "Name any body part." I then for the first time noticed a cloth in the corner of the room, covering up something which I could only assume to be a body. I had had enough. I unplugged my computer and lay on the floor panting for hours until I could finally get up. I now suffer from anxiety and won't touch a computer unless I absolutely have to. This probably isn't the scariest of stories, but it still worries me how badly things could have gone. It was the end of a long night, nearly 10 p.m., and all my friends had just caught the last train home. 13-year-old me was standing in Hamilton Central train station waiting on my mom to come and pick me up. The bus bay was near enough deserted, and there were very few people milling about. I wasn't particularly concerned about being alone at night. I did this every week after hanging out with my friends. I'd been standing there for about 15 minutes when an older, mid-30s, seemingly drunk man approached me asking for 50 pence for a bus. I told him I didn't have any money, and he wandered off to ask the other people around at the shop. He returned a few minutes later and stood beside me, occasionally looking me up and down. Despite my age, I was around 6 feet, and always looked about 16 or 17, and was pretty used to guys in their 20s hitting on me, but this guy was different. He wasn't saying anything. He was just leering at me, and alarm bells were going off left, right, and center in my brain. Just as I opened my mouth to ask him if he needed anything, he started babbling away, asking about how long it would take to walk to Glasgow, as he needed to get there before 10, or the police would put him back in jail. Instinctively, I asked him what he had been in jail for, and he gave me the biggest grin, and starts telling me about how he had quote-unquote found someone fingering his bird, and so he messed him up. Long story short, he caught his girlfriend cheating on him, and killed the guy. He continues like this for a few minutes, then starts moving closer to where I'm standing. I was nearly blacking out with fear, as I was completely defenseless if he were to decide to stab me or take me. Luckily, just as he got within my personal bubble, my mom pulled up, and I bolted to the car and made her drive home as fast as she could. People often wonder what would happen if they used a Ouija board. Some people do it for fun. Some people use it for spiritual communications. I can tell you now that if you have no experience in using a Ouija board, do not do it. This is a story about what happens when you use one for fun without knowing the consequences. When I was about 12, it was Halloween night, go figure, and we had just had a Halloween party for family and friends. A few of my older sister's friends stayed the night that night, and we were just hanging out in our room, which we shared. One of her friends had a spirit tethered to her. That's what she claimed. Whether or not it was true, I still don't know to this day, and she said, let's go for it. I wanted nothing to do with it, but being 12 years old and curious, I had to observe. They didn't follow any of the rules that you're supposed to as far as not putting it on a blanket, not lighting the proper candles, and other things that you're supposed to do prior to using the Ouija board. They were just calling on spirits that they could think of and trying to communicate with them. That's where things got a little creepy. If I remember correctly, one of the spirits that came to the board was a woman, and she was not friendly. She began to spell out profanities, and they quickly shut that down. I can't remember what the second spirit was, but it was also not friendly and called itself Satan. All of a sudden, one of my sister's friends began to panic. She said she saw a man out on the street with a red and black face. We did not see the man out on the street, so I don't know if she was having a panic attack and seeing things or what. The next event that occurred was kind of insane and terrifying. All of a sudden, my sister started zoning out and staring at nothing. We tried to get her attention, and she gave no response. Then she got up and walked downstairs, and we were confused, so we just followed her. We heard something in the kitchen, so we went and checked that out. My sister was standing over the sink taking knives from the counter in the knife holder, and she was throwing them into the sink one after the other. We try to get her attention again, and again, she refuses to respond to us. Then she goes and grabs the coffee pot off of the coffee maker and drinks black coffee straight out of it. Mind you, she hated coffee at the time. She drank the entire thing. She got up and went to sit on the couch, and a couple of minutes later, she blinked and came to. She asked us why we were staring at her, and how did she get downstairs. To this day, she has no memory of what happened, and it is 21 years later. We're pretty sure that a spirit took over her body just to have some fun. My grandma, after my mom told her what had happened, came into the house and blessed it with holy water. It seemed to help for a while, and then I had the series of nightmares a year or so later, so I'm wondering if the holy water didn't really have much effect. So this is a lesson learned, and a disclaimer to anyone who wants to mess with a Ouija board. If you have no real experience with it, do not go there. You never know what you're going to be inviting into your home. So back in high school, I was a rather shy girl. This was during or after the recession, and my family had gotten a bit tight on money. Usually I didn't eat lunch, and I had to hide that fact from the staff at the school, so I studied in the library or sat outside on the field behind the school for lunch. Rarely had I ever eaten or sat in the lunchroom. As the school year went on and neared its end, prom was coming up. I never had enough money for a prom dress, so I always turned down any offers to go, simply because I didn't want people to know that I couldn't afford a dress, let alone the ticket to go in. Between classes, when I had to walk through the cafeteria, I noticed that there was a younger boy who would always stare at me. His friends would pat his shoulder, and I read one of their lips one day as they told him to, quote-unquote, ask her. The group of boys just looking and smiling, except for the nervous one who was simply staring at me. I would look away to the floor and grip my textbooks closer to my chest, walking down another hallway. Anyway, I kept finding ways to sort of get past him without him noticing. Now I know this sounds mean, but I didn't know him. I couldn't afford it, and I also felt like like he was dark inside. It was like every time I saw him, all I saw was a gray smoke around him, and there was a really uneasy feeling about it. Anyway, prom happened, and I lived right down the street from the high school, so I could hear the music and see all the kids driving down the road or walking to the school in their cool new clothes. As I sat there looking at the lights and the kids, I decided it was stupid to just watch the event happen without me, so I made myself go to sleep. A week or so after prom, I heard other kids in school talking about something, almost whispering. Apparently, the boy who wanted to ask me out to prom, he ended up asking another girl from another school. She said yes, but when she showed up to the house, her dad didn't like him and said that she shouldn't go. The boy then told the girl that he couldn't go to prom with her because something had come up and he wouldn't be going to prom with her at all. Those were his words. The father and the boy talked about it, and the father said that if he paid a portion for her dress, then they could go. The kid went back to the house and cut the screen to the back door with a knife. Then he unlocked it. Her father woke up and asked him what he was doing there, and the boy said, "I came to see you die," before charging at the father with a knife and a shovel. He managed to stab her dad 7 times. Her parents subdued the kid, and he was arrested and released on a $10,000 bond. The rest is history. So that's my prom night story. Oh yeah, and the dad did survive, which was great. My mom had always told me that I was gifted. I could always feel energies. I had dreams of things that would come to happen. I wouldn't say I'm a medium or anything like that. I've never communicated with spirits. More so, I'd say I attract them. We hopped apartments a lot when I was younger, and no matter where we went, an entity would immediately find me. I'd have recurring nightmares, see figures, be scratched, etc. You could say spirits like to pick on me. Another random fact that will come into play later. I had bright blue eyes, like my mother. We moved into this apartment, and things immediately went very, very poorly. I had a dream that only lasted seconds. I was in a bright white room, and there was this beast on the ceiling, and it looked into my eyes and roared. It was so incredibly loud. I woke up, and my mom and her boyfriend at the time had rushed to my aid because they heard me let out a scream that sounded like a deep, full-grown man's scream, not a prepubescent boy's. My eyes turned hazel with brown splotches, and have been that way ever since. I was terrified. We moved me into my big brother's room. That night, I felt a presence, opened my eyes, and I saw a shadowy figure reach out and try to grab me. I sprinted out of the room and slept next to my mom or on the couch in the living room from then on, but I always felt watched from the hallway leading to my bedroom. Another thing that happened was when I was laying in bed with my mom and her boyfriend, she looked up and saw a little girl in a petticoat standing in the hallway. He saw it too. I was asleep and only knew this because they told me years later. Anyhow, everyone was being terrorized for months, and eventually we had enough. We hired someone to come in, and she immediately detected a demonic presence. She had informed us that the building used to be a medical waste facility. They'd dispose of and store blood in the basement. That sort of thing. My mom has told me since that she was able to confirm this detail, but to be truthful, I never asked how. Thinking about and speaking about this incident brings me terrible feelings. Anyhow, she blessed the place, and it didn't really do anything. We tried writing scripture on the walls and this sort of highlighter stuff that you could only see in UV light. We put up some crosses, that sort of thing. It only served to make whatever it was angrier. We eventually moved out, and my mom spoke clearly as we left. "We're leaving. You are not allowed to follow us." I've never had another experience with a spirit. A friend of mine who says that she is a medium, I'm not sure what I believe about this sort of thing, told me that maybe God, maybe a spirit, maybe myself, walled myself off spiritually from my gift. I think that maybe it was the same spirit tormenting me my entire life up until that point. When I think about this, tears immediately begin pouring from my eyes. I'm 20 now, and this was easily one of the most turbulent times of my life. So for some backstory, my mother has breast cancer, and before our town got a cancer treatment center at the hospital, my mother would have to travel to a city 4 hours away to get treatment. At times, this would be 3 days. She would leave, get treated, and then come back on the 3rd day. At this time, my brother was in his early teens and was going through that rebellious stage of his life. So guess who gets called to look after him when my mother does her treatments? Day 1. My mother leaves early, about 6 in the morning, and tells me that she would send me a text message once she gets to her hotel. I came around yesterday so that my mother could leave early and told her to have a safe trip. Eventually my brother wakes up to get ready for school. This is on a Friday. I give him his lunch, and he's off. I spend my day just sitting around my mother's house, giving her cat some attention, giving the dog some food, watching TV. The basics, really. Sure enough, my brother returns back from school and we do the typical brother things. Night comes, he goes to bed, and I stay up for a little while watching TV. About 10, I turn it off and make my way to the spare room where I was staying while Mom was away. I get underneath the blanket and close my eyes. As I could feel myself on the verge of sleep, I hear it. Thud, 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 thud. It was the sound of footsteps, as though someone was quickly moving back and forth through the living room. My eyes shot open, and my thoughts quickly went to burglar. Someone was in my mother's house, moving around, trying to find something to steal. But as I listened, I noticed something else. I would hear it, then a pause, and then again, like someone was running back and forth, only stopping for a moment just to do it all over. The sound was too light for a grown person, but sounded more like that of a child. I sighed, believing this to be my brother. My mom had told me before she left about how my brother would sneak out of his room to grab his phone or Game Boy and play it when he was meant to be sleeping. Thinking this was the case, I get out of bed and make my way into the living room. As I did, the noise stopped. I continued on up to my brother's room. I opened the door and peeked in. He looked like he was sleeping, but looks can be deceiving. I returned to the living room and I decided to pretend to have fallen asleep on the couch so that I could catch my brother in action. Somehow I actually did fall asleep. I awoke to something brushing my nose. Turns out it was the dog. I look around to see the slightest of light coming in the windows. If I had to guess, it was maybe 2 or 3 in the morning. Tired, I get up and make my way back to bed. Once again, as I felt myself about to drift off, the noises started up again. In my tired state, I just concluded that it must be possums in the roof, and went back to sleep. Day 2. It was Saturday, so I let my brother sleep in. The lazy butthole didn't get up until 11. It went well. We hung out, had lunch, played some games, nothing really major. Well, not until that night. Once again, I stayed up while my brother went to bed, and again, around 10, I turned the TV off and went to go to sleep. Sure enough, just as I was about to drift off, thud, 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 thud. Those darn possums, I moaned to myself. Then I heard a little girl giggle. My eyes shot open after hearing that, and the running resumed. I sat up, hearing the playful running back and forth in the living room. I just sat there trying to figure out where this little girl's giggle had come from. It sounded like a 7 or a 10-year-old. I turned to the window, seeing the next-door neighbor's light still on. I began to think that the noise I was hearing was coming from them, that maybe they had a little girl over and she was just being a pest. It was a good possibility, except for one thing. The couple who lived there were old and didn't have any grandkids. I heard that giggle again, much clearer now, like it was just in the living room, which was just outside my door. Needless to say, I didn't sleep well that night. Day 3. That morning I was uneasy, but was glad that my mother was returning. About 1 p.m. she got back home, and I began to pack up to return home myself, but the events of the past 2 nights still stuck with me as I returned back to her. Getting the courage, I asked her if she had ever heard a little girl in that house. "Oh, her?" my mother states. "Yeah, she's quite a mischievous one, isn't she?" I just smiled and left. I spent other nights there looking after my brother, but never heard from her again, and when my mother moved to another house with another ghost, I felt like she traded one for another. But that's a different story. When I was in middle school, I went to a friend's birthday party sleepover where we did the typical girl things like painted nails, did makeovers, and watched a movie. It was all normal until my friend suggested that we make a Ouija board. On a sheet of paper, we scribbled out yes, no, goodbye, along with numbers and the alphabet. She told us all the rules, and we nodded in agreement that we would follow. I remember the first movement happening, and I looked across to the girl facing me, insisting that she had moved it. She said that it was not her that moved the clear pebble that we were all using as a planchette. We asked it dumb questions like who we each liked and if our crushes liked us. Typical middle school girl things. I don't remember much of these sessions other than a particular name, Wanda, and that we had asked her if she was a demon and that she had told us that she was not. After a while, this was no longer scary and we began to enjoy it more and more. I remember feeling so excited, like I just wanted to keep on playing as if it were a video game. The next day I told my dad about it. My family was pretty open-minded about those things, so he wasn't mad or ashamed, he just wanted to make sure that we were all safe about it. Fast forward, and I was in my first year of college over at a friend's place for her birthday, and she had talked about how she found a Ouija board and that we should try it. I was a little hesitant, as now I realized the true implications. We eventually started setting boundaries, but I was still hesitant to believe that the planchette was actually moving on its own. My friend asked questions like, "When's my birthday?" and "What's my name?" I shifted to questions not about myself, tending to ask about the entity rather than me. My friend suddenly asked if the spirit knew my deceased grandfather's name, and it spelled out Lewis. I was in shock because none of my friends could have known that. I know that I hadn't directed the planchette to the letters, so I was surprised to see that it was correct. Later on, another friend of mine had said that she felt something grab her foot under the table. I was right next to her, and I didn't feel a thing. At that point, I was like, okay, let's say goodbye and call it a night. It was all just too weird. I've never had a truly bad experience, but it's still very creepy, to say the least. This happened back when I was a freshman in high school. I had this friend who lived next door to me and asked me to accompany him to Dairy Queen to buy a vape from some girl from his school. We'll call him Tyler. After school, I met up with Tyler at our apartment complex since school had just let out for him as well. We walked to Dairy Queen, which was about 1.5 miles, roughly, up the street. This was in the middle of winter, so it was very cold and rainy. The walk took about 30 minutes. We arrived at the Dairy Queen and waited for an hour for this girl who never showed up. She eventually texted Tyler after an hour of telling him she was getting ready and said that she was unable to get a ride, which was total BS, because she apparently lived right by the Dairy Queen. We were annoyed and started our walk back home. We were talking about how we were going to hit the hot tub when we returned. Now, for some understanding, there is a large Walmart that you had to get past to get to the Dairy Queen. Before you get to the Walmart, there's another apartment complex that we also had to pass. A girl named Carly lived there, and was dating our friend named Dre. We stopped at her apartment because Tyler saw her outside taking her trash out and wanted to flirt with her, which is something he would do with every girl that he came across. She was visibly upset, and you could tell that she had been crying. She told Tyler that Dre had dumped her. Now, for a bit of context, Dre was once friends with Tyler, but they had a falling out a few days prior to this story. We all three would hang out at the apartment complex that Tyler and I lived at, and Dre was actually a longtime family friend of mine, too. After a few minutes of Tyler and Carly chatting, we finally left and headed home. As we were about to pass Walmart, there was a big bush on the sidewalk in front of the Walmart. As we were walking, we saw two dark figures emerge from behind the bush and look in our direction. Tyler had a lot of enemies, so he was paranoid that there was someone coming after him. I told him not to worry, as it could have been anyone, and it was probably just some random homeless people, as this area was full of random transients. He suggested we cut through the back alley behind Walmart because he was fully convinced it was someone who wanted to jump him. I'll admit, I was a bit nervous myself, as I wasn't sure what kind of enemies that he had, or what they wanted, and I was afraid that they might do something to me since I was with Tyler, which, in hindsight, was probably a bit selfish, but I was a kid. We decided to just continue down the sidewalk we were on, and take our chances agreeing to just book it if they tried anything. The closer we got, the sketchier the whole situation became, because these people just kept peeking around the bushes at us. Once we got to the bush, I was surprised to see Dre and a well-known thug, future murderer, named D, come out from behind it. Dre looked pissed, and D had a weird grin on his face that made me know that they were up to no good. I also noticed that D was holding his cell phone at a weird angle, like he was recording or something. That made me extremely nervous. Dre and D just walked up to us on the sidewalk, with D still awkwardly smirking, and Dre asked where we were coming from. I didn't say anything, as I didn't want to be involved in the beef that Dre and Tyler had with each other. Tyler began to try and explain to Dre that we were coming back from Dairy Queen and that we had run into Dre's girlfriend Carly and that Carly was upset over their breakup. Dre didn't believe him, and accused him of trying to hit on her. He said that they never broke up, and accused Tyler of lying. Tyler attempted to get me involved by looking at me as if he expected me to confirm that Carly in fact had said that they broke up. I froze and just shrugged my shoulders, and tried to make it clear that I wanted no part of anything. Dre didn't say anything for a few seconds, and then after an awkward silence, Tyler attempted to part ways and walk up the street after saying goodbye. All of a sudden, Dre shoved Tyler to the ground, and then sucker punched him in his face as he crawled back to his feet. D began hysterically laughing in a very menacing way, and I just stood there looking at Dre, waiting for him to come after me next. You see, the night before this, I had gotten into it with Dre over a text and called him a little bitch because he wouldn't forgive Tyler. I know that was immature now. He walked past me without doing anything, and walked up the street in the opposite direction. Now by this point, Tyler was hysteric and started running up the street yelling at me to come on or they would get me, and I was trying to keep up with him. He yelled at me for not helping him. At that moment, Tyler's mom pulled up next to us and we got into her car and she drove us home. He was crying and he told her what had happened. She seemed kind of dismissive about the whole thing and said to just stay away from Dre. I was just happy to be away from the situation. Tyler went straight to his house and didn't talk to me again for a few days. I guess he was still mad at me about not helping him. In my defense, everything happened so fast that I didn't really know what to do. Dre ended up texting me after I got home just saying, "Hey," but I ignored it. The next encounter with D was a bit more alarming, as he apparently did indeed want to get me next. Tyler and I were just hanging out at the apartments one day when he got a text from one of his friends that Dre and Dee were smoking weed at the supermarket right next door to the apartments. Apparently, Dre told Dee about how I was best friends with Tyler and had been quote-unquote talking smack, to which Dee responded by suggesting that they walk over to my apartments to beat me up. Dre told him no, because we were family friends, so that was the end of that. I didn't see Dee again until high school when he was put into my algebra class. He walked into the classroom with that same creepy smile on his face that he always seemed to have and sat down across from my desk. He turned to me during a quiz and asked me if I remember him, to which I replied the affirmative. He asked me if I remember Dre, and when Dre punched Tyler, and once again, I said yes. This kid went on about how he enjoyed watching Dre do that to Tyler, and he actually had 2 knives in his pocket that day and wanted to use them on Tyler, but Dre wouldn't let him. So fast forward to 2018, I was walking around Sears with my fiancé trying to find baby clothes for our son, who was due soon. I hadn't heard anything about Dre or Dee since high school, and I received a text from an old buddy from school telling me that Dee got arrested for allegedly shooting some girl in the back of the head at a party. Apparently, she refused to sell him cocaine, so he shot her in a fit of rage. He fled the scene and was arrested soon after that on attempted murder charges, since the girl survived. She ended up making a full recovery. This wasn't even the first time Dee has shot someone. A year prior, he had shot some kid in the leg during a drug deal gone bad. I'm not sure if Dre is still friends with Dee, but as far as I know, he's not involved in the things he used to be involved with. So to the psycho who plotted to jump me and shot 2 people, let's not meet again. I've been a babysitter a bunch of times. Sometimes I take care of the kids of my mom's friends, other times I take care of my little cousins. I really liked to babysit all of my kids, because it usually went smoothly and none of them were problematic to deal with. One time I was babysitting my little cousins, who at the time were 6, 4, 2, and 5 months old. My aunt told me that the baby monitor needed new batteries, so I decided to just check on the baby from time to time. The night went as usual. The bigger kids ate dinner, played a bit, then watched some cartoons, and fell asleep a few minutes after. I was downstairs just texting with some friends and tried to listen carefully in case my baby cousin made any sounds. For most of the night, I thought I heard the baby making sounds, so I kept going in there and checking on him. I believed it was just my mind playing tricks on me, probably because I was on high alert, waiting for something to happen. Around midnight, the 2-year-old woke up crying because of a nightmare, so I grabbed him and let him lay on my chest until he fell asleep, and then I tucked him into bed again. A few minutes passed, and I heard the baby screaming, so I ran upstairs and did what I could to calm him down so that the other kids wouldn't wake up. As soon as I get to the door, the screaming stops, and when I entered the bedroom to check on him, he was sound asleep. I freaked out and checked everything in the nursery, hoping to find some kind of toy with a similar sound, but there was nothing. I immediately went and checked on the other kids, praying that they were okay. Fortunately, all 4 kids were asleep, and it appeared to have not disturbed anyone. Still, I made sure everything was all right, and that nothing had actually made a sound. I was kind of surprised that the scream hadn't woken any of the other kids up, but at the same time I was thankful for it, because I didn't want the other kids to be scared in their own house, and also I wouldn't know how to explain what had happened to my aunt and uncle without freaking them out. I didn't hear any other sounds for the rest of the night, until my aunt and uncle came home. I decided to not say anything, and just take the money and go home. Disclaimer. I am completely aware that this story involves me being very stupid and careless. I'm not going to inject these acknowledgments into the story, but rest assured that in hindsight, I am aware of the foolishness that took place. Now, where to begin? The year was approximately 1998 or 1999. I was a young gay man in my early 20s, living in a medium-sized city in the Midwestern US. This was sort of an in-between transitional time for gay people, where in most populous areas we had enough respect to live openly, but there was still plenty of people who did not like us. It was well before the invention of smartphones, and the internet was still in the early stages of mass adoption. There were large communities online, but it was not yet at that point where most Americans were online. Online socialization consisted of chat rooms hosted by various services like AOL, Yahoo, or IRC servers, and message boards were still in use by large numbers of people. For gay men at the time, it was nothing short of revolutionary. Prior to the internet and to the broader cultural changes, gay men had been stuck looking for fun in secretive and/or shady places due to the inability to freely express ourselves. In the 90s, it was still somewhat risky, but the internet offered a way to talk freely and relatively anonymously without the risk of being outed or worse. For this reason, it really took off in the gay communities, and gay men were a very large part of the user bases for these social platforms. It was suddenly very easy and relatively safe to find dates, friends, or just sex, and it quickly became the norm for a lot of gay men. On the other hand, being such a new tool for most people for communication, we were sometimes blind to the risks. Being an attractive young man in my prime, I made liberal use of the online communities to find dates. That is to say, I had plenty of hookups. My city had a decent number of chat rooms and personal message boards, and I had mostly great experiences. I met the typical assortment of good guys, closet cases, and the weirdos that you would expect. I was an absolute quote-unquote hoe by most standards, but suffice to say that a cute gay guy at that time could generally have a lot more dates than your typical straight person. At some point during this time, I had some brief chat on a message board with a guy from my city. I forgot his screen name, it's been over 20 years, so let's call him Slim Guy 65. This back and forth had happened on a general thread in the gay section, not in private messages, so it was visible to anyone who chose to read that thread. Nothing had come of it, but a week later, I received an email from an unrecognized address. The email basically said, "Hey, I'm not gay and I don't agree with the gay lifestyle. I'm here because my friend met this guy, Slim Guy 65, from the message board, and the guy really hurt him. I don't want to see this happen to anyone else. My friend tried to tell the police, but they wouldn't do anything. I see you're talking to Slim Guy 65, so just be careful and stay away from him." Okay, I thought, that's strange. What does this person mean by really hurt him? Was his heart broken? Did he get beaten up or verbally abused, or what? I responded to the email, asking for clarification on what exactly had happened. I never received a response. I was slightly weirded out by it, but on the other hand, it's an anonymous email from someone who doesn't respond and is vague about their warning. This could be anything. It could be some disgruntled ex trying to mess with the guy. It could be a real warning about some gay bashing. It could be someone trolling who doesn't have anything to do with anyone. I kept it in the back of my mind, but pretty much shrugged it off. Several weeks later, I had a weekday off of work and decided to take to the internet, as was my custom. Lo and behold, I had an email response to a personal ad. It was Slim Guy 65. He was offering to meet at his place to hang out and just have a good time. Wink wink, nudge nudge. I won't go into the details. As I recall, there weren't really many details discussed other than small talk and intros that we had done previously. Nothing about this guy was really sounding interesting to me, but I had no other offers on this day, so I decided why not. I'll go see what this dude is about. As I typed my reply, I suddenly remembered the strange email that I had received warning me about this person. I went back and reread it. Still vague, still presenting more questions than answers. Should I take this anonymous warning at face value and just ignore SG65? I decided to go check him out anyway. His address was on a rather busy street in the middle of a dense residential area, not some shack out in the woods, and I can handle myself. If he's weird, I can just nope out of there. Before long, I arrived at the house at the agreed time. It was a duplex-style home, with one apartment on the ground floor and one on the second floor, part of a row of several identical duplexes. It was the middle of the afternoon, there was plenty of traffic on the street, and the occasional person out on their porch or their backyard. I pulled up the driveway to the parking area behind the house, got out, and knocked on the door. The guy that answered was a pretty normal, kind of mousy-looking man, probably in his 40s. Slight, slim build, soft-spoken, looked like just about any guy working in any office cubicle anywhere. Not really my type, but honestly, my curiosity was piqued, and I had nothing better to do, so I stepped inside to take a look around and gauge the situation with the warning email fresh in my mind. I stepped into the back door, into the kitchen. It was very clean, and there was nothing out on the counters, no table, no chairs, nothing. That is to say, it did not look like someone was living there. It had been kept up and cleaned, but was empty. Looking out into the apartment, I could see that it was not set up as a living space. It had a large window with sliding glass that was between the kitchen and living room, and I could see what looked like a large table out in the living room area. SG65 said something like, "This isn't where I live. A friend of mine used to run a doctor's office here and I maintain the building for him. It's private though, we have the place to ourselves." Weird. Okay. He shut the back door and locked it with a keypad deadbolt. The kind you need a key to open, even from the inside, and put his keys in his back pocket, saying, "So what do you want to do?" At this point, my danger sense spiked. This is not a normal home, and why is he locking the door like that? It's not necessarily suspect. A lot of people have that sort of lock on their door, and the door has a window in it, so it makes sense, even. Still, something is not right here, I can tell, and now I'm locked in. I asked him why he was locking the door like that, which immediately flustered him. He was looking around rather nervously, and his voice was wavery and halting. Not quite stuttering, but almost. He said, well, we don't want someone to come in and interrupt us, right?" Flashing a weak, unconvincing smile. His demeanor and body language were all I needed to confirm that this guy was up to no good, or at least that there was something he was hiding. However, I could tell that I was intimidating him. I wasn't a particularly muscular kid, but I have a larger frame. Like, even when I'm at my thinnest, I still wear size L tops and 36 waist pants, so I look big, which people tend to interpret as me being stronger than I really am. Also, I'm not a tough guy at all, but I have a resting facial expression that makes me look like a thug. People who don't know me often assume that I'm rough or something. I sometimes use this to my advantage while I can, because before long a new acquaintance will eventually figure out that I'm a total wimp. But this was definitely an occasion to play up the tough guy appearance, and I did exactly that. I put on my best steely face and told him to unlock the door, and that I don't want to be locked in here. He looked for a moment like he was going to pee his pants, then said, "Okay, alright, I'll unlock this." He unlocked the deadbolt. "And I'll just lock the knob here." And he turned the little dial that locks the doorknob. That was fine with me. I continued to stare at him until he said, "I'll leave the keys on the counter right here." And he set his keys down near the sink. I was relatively satisfied with that answer. At this point, though, my adrenaline was flowing, and I was almost in full flight or fight mode. But I was stuck, kind of stuck in place. The guy was between me and the door. I was freaked out, but this little weasel did not appear to pose any immediate physical threat to me. I could tell that his pant pockets were empty, and that I was intimidating the living hell out of him. I didn't yet know exactly what to do. Now keep in mind that despite my wordy descriptions, this all happened very quickly without any really long pauses. It had only been maybe 1 to 2 minutes since I had stepped in the door. This all happened at the pace of a conversation. The guy was obviously nervous and trying not to appear so. He said, "Well, let's go in," and walked a wide path around me through the kitchen into what would normally be the living room, and toward the hall to the right from there. I was familiar with this floor layout. It's very common in the area. The hallway would lead to 2 small bedrooms, with a bathroom in between them. I hesitated, thinking that I should just walk out that back door and take off. But really, now I was super curious. I knew there's no way in hell I'm doing anything with this guy, but I kinda want to see what's going on in here. Also, I'm confident that he can't take me if it comes to a fight. So, I slowly headed toward the living room. It felt like I was walking in slow motion. From the kitchen entrance, I could see a large, rectangular, stainless steel table taking up a lot of the living space. I remember thinking this looked like a surgical table. It looked like it could rise and tilt, and it had a recessed channel running all the way around the edge. In hindsight, I now know what it was. It was 100% a mortician's table. Dude had a mortician's table in there. But at the time, I just thought it looked like some sort of medical table. There were some other office-type cabinets and stuff around, I think, but now all I really remember is the table itself. The large front window looking out onto the street was covered by vertical blinds that were closed. SG-65 said something like, "This used to be a doctor's office, like I said. Come on back here." The hallway revealed the room setup that I had expected. The first bedroom door was closed. The second door was open to a very small, very clean bathroom. At the end of the hall was the other bedroom, which looked like, if the doctor's office story were true, had at one time been converted to an exam room. He said, "We can go in that room if you want. Go ahead and take a look." And he stayed by the other closed bedroom door. The back bedroom door was open, and I could see the walls were covered in a honey-colored wood paneling, the type you might see in a den or office that hasn't been updated since the early 70s. I slowly took a few steps toward that door, trying to be very aware of what Mr. Creepy was doing behind me. He didn't move. When I got up to that room, the first thing I noticed was the door had a keypad deadbolt lock, just like the back door. This room locked from the outside. I wondered if there was a lever on the inside, but I pretty much know the answer to that question without needing to check. I also saw a chair. A non-swiveling, plastic desk chair with thin metal legs sitting near the center of the room. The room had old, dark carpet and those wood-paneled walls. I noticed that the walls were completely paneled with no windows. And I know that room had at least one window, probably 2, so whoever did that paneling went over them on purpose. There was also a phone in there, plugged in, and sitting on the floor. It was an old office phone, probably from around the 80s or early 90s, dingy beige plastic with several buttons to manage different phone lines. It was just sitting there on the carpet near the wall, with the chair at a slight distance facing the phone. There was nothing else in that room. I was standing at the threshold of the room, with one foot slightly in, absolutely not going past that door frame. I looked back at Dude. He was still standing by the other door, just nervously smiling at me, trying very hard to look casual, but obviously very nervous or something. He said something like, "Well, what do you want to do?" Instead of answering, I felt around the back side of the deadbolt lock. Sure enough, nothing there but the smooth wood of the door. It also dawned on me that I did not see a light switch anywhere for the ceiling lamp. Where was the switch? Who knows? It should have just been on the inside of the door, of course, but that original switch was covered by the paneling. He mumbled something about not having the key to that lock. Don't worry about it. I turned back to face the guy and just said, "What is it that you want to do in here?" My skin had gone ice cold, as I realized that I was way, way, way too far into this apartment. I was running through my options in my head. What was this guy going to do? He didn't appear to have any weapon or anything in reach, but who the hell knows what goes on in that place? What are you trying to do? He was almost totally derailed by that. He stammered out, "Some hot man-to-man fun?" with the weakest smile that I have ever seen, looking like he was just a hair's breadth away from panicking. That sounds comical, but really, that sentence was probably the most chilling part of the entire experience for me. It was the way he said it. Like he had to come up with something on the fly, something that would sound plausible, and he failed. Who says that in real life? Hey, do you want to have some hot man-to-man fun? Nobody. It's something you'd see on an advertisement for a cheesy porn site or something. That was it. I said, "Nope, I want to go, I'm leaving." He said, okay. I quickly walked past him as he flattened himself against the wall to avoid me, and I noped right out through the living room dissection area and through the kitchen to the back door, which was thankfully still not deadbolted. The keys were still on the counter. I let myself out and didn't bother closing that as I saw him slowly coming to the door behind me. I deliberately walked, not ran, to my car. Looking back at the building, I could see that indeed there was a window facing the backyard area from that paneled room, but of course it was covered up from the inside. Dude was shutting and locking the back door, and I left, heart pounding, skin icy cold, thinking, holy crap, what was that? So, was this guy some sort of killer? Or was he just an awkward, closeted gay guy with access to a sterile-looking apartment with an autopsy/mortuary table and a windowless room that locks from the outside, with a chair and a phone and no light switch? It's clear to me that the poor soul who walks into that room gets locked in. He probably shuts off the light from somewhere and calls the phone. Other than that, it's anyone's guess as to what actually happens. I assume the friend of the judgmental person who emailed me must have been some kid that got locked in for whatever game ensues. Driving home, at first I thought, of course I have to call the police and tell them what's in that place. But thinking it through, I realized that I didn't really have any crime to tell them about. I went to meet a man for casual sex, and what? He has a room with a chair in it? He has, as I thought at the time, an exam table? The police aren't going to do anything with that story. The guy didn't touch me or do anything to me, and I left. I considered calling an anonymous tip line, but again, what exactly would I report? There was no actionable crime. Also, keep in mind that at that time, while the local police in the city were pretty decent, they weren't especially interested in getting involved with helping out the gays. They would prosecute actual crimes if it was cut and dry, but I heard plenty of accounts of them not choosing to follow up on cases where there was not an easy arrest to be made. I decided not to report anything because nothing would come of it except drawing unwanted attention to myself. Even in retrospect, I think that that was probably the most rational choice to make. If this happened today in 2020, the law enforcement would probably be a lot more interested in it. But back then, not so much. So, live and learn. I still drove past that house once in a while during the normal course of life over the next several years, and I'd pay attention to how it looked. The vertical blinds were closed for maybe 5 or 6 years whenever I went past. Then, eventually, the blinds were down, and there were decorative curtains in the windows, so I assumed that the place was eventually sold to someone who actually lived in it. Around 2002, maybe 2003, there was the murder of a young man on the news. He had been found in the next state, which borders on my city, so it's not very far away. I recognized the guy from the gay community, but didn't know him personally. A friend mentioned to me something about the local serial killer. I said, "What?" He explained that a few young men had gone missing over the past year, each after being at one specific dive bar, and each being found several miles to the north past the state line, and out in the country. The case on the news matched with that MO. My friend told me that the young guy had been at that bar and left with someone that night, and that he had disappeared. The news report didn't mention anything about a gay bar or similar recent cases, of course. I had to wonder if my acquaintance from the internet had anything to do with it. The location of the murders apparently was nowhere near that duplex, or at least according to the story I was told. I never heard of a resolution to that murder on the news, or any official mention of a suspected serial killer other than gossip. This happened about 2 weeks ago while my brother and his wife were at a party. My own wife and I get called to babysit my nephews and nieces for these sorts of moments by all of my siblings. In this instance, when we were asked to babysit my 5-year-old nephew, his 3-year-old sister, and his 6-month-old brother, we happily obliged. They live in a newish, 10-year-old house, and the only significant location near it is an important cultural site for the local Cree peoples about 10 kilometers away. The hard work was done for us, as the 5- and 3-year-old were asleep upstairs before we arrived. The baby was not fussy but would not sleep, so we were hanging out with him on the main floor. As the night dragged on, around 10:30 I heard a baby crying upstairs. Thinking the 3-year-old must have woken, I left the happy baby with my wife and went to check on our niece. My wife heard the crying as well and asked me to go check. On my way up the flights of stairs, I definitely heard crying from that floor, and I pushed my head into the kids' room to listen. The crying was still going on, but both kids were sound asleep. The sound was coming from across the hall, the nursery, so being quite confused, I moved toward that room. The crying ceased about midway between the door and the crib. Seeing the room was empty, I immediately began trying to explain it to myself. I picked up the baby monitor unit in the room to make sure that it wasn't picking up an errant signal from another house. It was not on, and didn't have a speaker anyways. There were no toys that made that noise around, and no TVs or devices that might play those noises in the room. I stuck around to listen a while longer, but nothing came of it. My wife was baffled and a little spooked, as she had clearly heard the crying as well. Nothing happened the rest of that night, and my nephew is still just the same wonderful kid that he has always been, so I guess no harm, no foul, spooky ghost. My brother and his wife went white when I told them about it at Christmas, but to my knowledge, it is the only thing like that that has ever happened in their house. His house has no history and had also been smudged, so no advice is necessary from anyone. I just thought y'all might appreciate a wholesome, unexplained experience. This happened to my dad, who told me this story when I accidentally discovered a Ouija board in a closet in our house. He was living in Spain at the time, and during the 1970s, he bought that Ouija board. He told me that one day he talked too much with a wise entity who responded to everything so clearly and philosophically. The thing is, my dad asked it, "Where are you?" and the board started to mark random numbers and letters such as 1652AC, 8820, that kind of thing. My dad, who was consternated, thought that it was decontextualized. Nonetheless, and he cannot explain why, he wrote down the entire random series of numbers. And letters on a paper that he had left sitting on a shelf. The disturbing part after that is that a few years during the 1980s, later, my dad was watching Cosmos with Carl Sagan, and he told me that in that show, Sagan explained that scientists had discovered a new galaxy that was called with a sequence of numbers and letters. My dad was so impressed, so he copied down the name of the show and he looked for the paper on the shelf. And yes, it was the same sequence. My dad is fascinated with this experience and told me that the Ouija is not just spiritual, it is also interdimensional. When he told me, I was between scared and curious, and I considered aliens using the Ouija board. He still believes that this wise entity is up there somewhere, talking with others. This is my mom and dad's story. It was their honeymoon. They married in August of 1980 in Australia, and they were driving along the Bruce Highway into a city called Rockhampton, Queensland. It was late at night, 8 p.m.-ish, and they had been driving most of the day. There is a very long stretch of road before you come into the city that's just bush, kilometers of it. At night, the bush can be very scary. They had not passed cars for some time, probably a couple of hours. Out of nowhere, headlights appeared a long way behind them in their rearview mirror. That was fine, whatever. They keep driving as normal. Then, the headlights start getting closer and closer. My dad is driving, and says something like, "What a bloody turkey. Look at how fast he's going." The car comes right up to them with their high beams on, and follows them for about 5 minutes like that. Mom and Dad have a conversation about why can't the person just overtake them. Then, the car completely backs off. Like slows right down, almost to a complete stop, and hangs back about 1 to 2 kilometers away for a good 15 minutes. Mom and Dad both think that is super weird and creepy, but again, whatever. They just keep going. Then the car speeds up again, tailgating high beam and sort of swerving into the other lane as if to get to overtake them, but he never did. This goes on for another 5-ish minutes. Mom and Dad are both really scared now. Remember, this is the days before mobiles or cell phones, and besides, there would have been no reception in that area to call for help, even if they had them, and it's not over yet. The car backs off again, but not as far as before, and then hangs back there for about a minute, before hitting the gas and absolutely flying past Mom and Dad and finally passing them. There appeared to be only one person in the car, but they couldn't really see what that person looked like. There was also no number plate on the car to identify it. And I know my dad has told me heaps of times before, but I can't actually remember what sort of car it was now. I feel like it was sort of a sedan type of thing. Definitely white. The car disappears up the road, as if it were never there. Mom and Dad were shaken to their core, but pleased that it was seemingly over. But no, it's still not done yet. The road now becomes a bit more windy, whereas previously it had almost been straight. Mom and Dad come around a corner and the car is parked in the middle of the road, facing them, again with high beams on, both driver and passenger doors wide open, and the man, they could now see that it was a man, standing in front of the car with his arms spread wide. Spread as if to make them stop. Mom was screaming at Dad, "Just hit him, don't stop, just hit him." And my dad, being the bloody hero that he is, did not stop, and drove around the man's car on the right-hand side of it, which would be the passenger side as it was parked facing them. The man tried to get in front of Dad, I assumed to stop him from driving off, as he made this maneuver, but he couldn't quite get there in time. He was very close to the car, and Dad nearly hit him. Dad absolutely floored it. He said he was doing around 130, 140 kilometers per hour to get away from that man. They aren't sure how long they drove like that, but they didn't slow back down to the speed limit until they started to come into the city limits. They made it to their hotel and parked the car at the back of the hotel so that you couldn't see it from the road, because it was on the side of the highway and passing traffic could see the cars parked there. Mom was quite hysterical and told reception what had happened. They called the police and reported it, but they never found the car or the driver. Fast forward to many years later, and Mom was watching the news, and Ivan Milat had just been arrested. Mom screamed and called Dad into the lounge room. They both agreed that he was in fact the man that they saw. They were absolutely adamant. I can't find evidence to suggest that Ivan Milat was active in Queensland during that time, but I certainly won't call Mom and Dad liars because of what they saw. I imagine it was another creepy hillbilly who looked very similar to Mr. Backpacker Murderer. My boyfriend at the time and I went to Key West in 2014 for vacation back in my junior year of college. Doing some bar hopping, we went into the main strip's Coyote Ugly bar. I ended up sitting next to this very thin, dark-haired woman. When I asked her if it was alright if I sat there, she turned her head toward me in an incredibly slow manner. She nodded her head up and down, equally slow. I don't think anything of it. My boyfriend and I order a drink, and we're talking amongst ourselves for a minute. I'm facing away from the woman, and I feel her tap on my shoulder. So I turn around, and she's raising her glass to me in cheers. I should explain what she looks like, because it's a lot like what I imagine a demon wearing human skin would look like. Bone thin, sallow, with stringy black hair, sharp cheekbones, and nose. Her eyes were black. I mean huge black pupils that didn't blink. They looked static. She does her cheers and opens her mouth to smile, and her gums are gray. Her teeth are gray and small, and I remember having this overwhelming feeling that she wanted to eat my flesh. I'm in pretty much panic mode at this point and whip my head back toward my boyfriend. He saw this woman too by now, and he grabs me by the arm to get us to move to the back of the room as quickly as possible. I'm basically cowering. I know, super brave. I always loved reading about demons, and possibly faced with one, I'm jello. I turn to start making our way out to the street, and the woman has got her head completely cranked around to stare at me from the bar. I feel her gazing at me as we leave, and I haul ass back to the hotel. She didn't say a single word throughout the entire encounter. I always regretted not asking her to speak. I will say, my boyfriend and I talked about it after and considered the gray teeth and mouth and general craziness possibly due to drugs. But I've seen my fair share of drug addicts. Even had one try to kidnap me. And this was not the same. I think about this episode pretty often, even years later. That feeling of encountering something soulless that wanted to harm me has never diminished. In the early 2000s, when I was 4 or 5 years old, my parents had just gotten through divorce, and my mom started dating this guy. He would come over to our house regularly. Things didn't seem that bad at first, but he actually drank daily. This was something I didn't understand yet at my age, but yeah. So this guy wasn't all that bad with my sister, who was 2 or 3 at the time, but he took some sadistic interest in hurting me. He would arrive at our house almost every day, and the first thing he would do was take off his belt and start beating me with it. This got to the point where I would hide if I knew he was coming. As for why my mother didn't leave him then, he threatened to kill us if she did. Now, this one incident is burned into my memory. On one random day, he had found a nice little cardboard box. He picked me up and shoved me into said box and sat on top of it. My mother was doing the dishes, and I assumed she couldn't hear me screaming for her as I peered out of the box's handle hole at her back, before he covered the holes with his hands. I screamed for a good few minutes as this asshole just laughed about torturing me. The only reason he got off the box was that I had a small screwdriver in my pocket that I used to stab him right in his ass cheek. This got him to fly up off the box, and pissed him off because he wasn't having fun anymore. He picked me up again and carried me off to my room, where he proceeded to beat me with his belt. Then he left me in my room, after taking my lamp, and locked my door. I was afraid of the dark, so I cried and screamed some more. I did so until he finally left, and my mother came and opened my door again. The random beatings would go on until he eventually got in trouble for something and ended up going to jail. Sometimes I think maybe my mother called the police on him. He called my mom from jail and told her that if she found anyone else, that he would kill her, me, and my younger sister. We ended up moving 3 cities over, and as far as I know, my mom never heard from him again. This guy is almost single-handedly responsible for several of my long-term phobias, and as an adult now, I'd kick his ass if I saw him again. I had just moved into a new place, and I was living alone. I bought a Ouija board and played with it my first night there by myself. Nothing really happened, so I stashed it in my dresser under some old jeans and forgot about it. A few weeks later I was having a party and suggested that we all play with it. Everyone agreed. I went to get it, but it wasn't there. I was dumbfounded. I'm pretty tidy. I know where I put it, but I could not find it. I couldn't explain it, so I just said that I had misplaced it. I had basically forgotten about it by the next morning. Fast forward 6 months. As I'm going to bed, I lie on my stomach. I slide my arms under my pillow to get comfy. My hand hits something. It's the planchette. I have no idea how it ended up there. I threw it out, and I have never seen it again, but I fear that whatever happened with the board, and the fact that I was an edgy teen, opened something up. I was into all that black magic crap. I've done lots of rituals with seemingly no results. There's a lot more to this story. Basically, my roommates and I were terrorized in 2 separate houses by something that we cannot explain. Like it was following us. All I know is that it looked like a little girl, but I don't think that it was. I never believed in this kind of stuff, but it's hard to deny what we all experienced. I had a strange babysitting experience the other night. Everything was normal until the kids were in bed, and so I was just scrolling through random vids on Instagram to pass the time. I was watching one, and I heard something. It was as if a man or one of the boys pretending to have a deep voice was upstairs, said "no" or something in a weirdly growly voice. I was confused and a little spooked. So I brushed it off and sat on the couch to watch a movie. Their dog was walking around and growling at the windows that led to the backyard. That creeped me out too, but again I just brushed it off as the dog seeing a squirrel or something. At this point it's around 10 p.m. He then was laying on my lap and started growling and barking toward the kitchen. At this point I was like, come on man, you better cut that out. Because who on earth wouldn't be creeped out by that? Later, I heard these incredibly light, whispery voices like children. I wasn't completely sure if it was just the kids waking up and making noise, but it only lasted for a moment after I noticed. I noticed those weird things, but I really didn't put them together until later that night. I talked to my mom after, and she told me that my sister and her friend had babysat there as well, and they both had an odd experience, i.e. bad vibes, the kids telling her that she's seen some things, and the kids actually addressing something that wasn't there. My mom didn't tell me before so that I wouldn't be spooked, which I guess was good, because I got an independent witness of whatever happened without being influenced by other people's experiences. But anyways, that's what took place. I'll still go back and babysit. I'll just be prepared to throw hands with Casper. This happened a few years ago while I was still in college. My best friend of many years is back in town, so we decided to get together and we stayed out fairly late, but hey, we're college kids, nighttime is our thing. My friend is very, very Catholic, and she decided to drive us this night. Mind you, neither of us was doing any drinking. After many shenanigans and lots of catching up, it was time to go home. It was probably around 2, 3 a.m. Still not exhausted, but she definitely was. Well, I'm staring at her dash where one of her many Catholic baubles were in the car when we get to the last light before she drops me at my house. I look out the window, as one does, and was met with the person in the car next to us staring into the car, and I kid you not, I screamed. The guy had gray skin, black eyes with no white, and a smile that was too long with sharpened teeth. He didn't break eye contact with me, and I was freaking out. My friend was completely oblivious until I said her name. She somehow didn't hear me scream. I, as calmly as possible, told her to look at the guy in the car next to us, and then she silently screamed too, and then proceeded to freak out and gunned it out of the intersection. Once again, this was 3 a.m., the light was still red, and she was not having this. She sped to my house and had me watching behind the car to make sure that we weren't being followed, whilst praying aloud, something she never does as she knows that I'm not religious. A few very short moments later, she pulls up in front of my house. She also put her high beams on as I walked to my door because she was, again, not about this. After I was safely inside, she called my cell and had me on the phone until she made it to her house all of 3 minutes later. We were both really shaken up about it the next day, but we never talked about it again. Anytime I've tried to bring it up, she shudders and changes the topic immediately. She did tell me she went to be blessed the next day, on a random Tuesday. I can still feel the soul-shaking sensation of looking that guy in the eyes. I'm not saying it couldn't have been some dude dressed up in a costume or something, but it shook both of us to our core. It was a Monday night, at around 3 in the morning, and I honestly don't feel like this was a normal human occurrence. So my boyfriend recently moved to the city and got this room in this student building. To explain, we have 3 different levels, and each level is the same. It has 4 individual doors with individual locks. Each door is a separate room that you can rent. So you share shower, toilet, kitchen, but overall it's kind of like having your own place. More like an apartment than a house. He lives on the 3rd floor, and we recently bought a cabinet for his place. So as we were lifting the cabinet through the front door, the guy also comes into the building with us. We politely let him pass because lifting the thing upstairs is going to take a lot of time. I smile at him and say hello, and then see his face. Legit, then, all my stranger danger alarms start going off. He had this weird smile, like a satisfied, smug kind of grin. He towered over me, and I saw his dirty mustache that barely even was a mustache. That kind of thing 14-year-olds grow. Nothing really is there yet, just here and there are some hairs. Also, his hair looked greasy, and he just looked dirty. I noticed he went to the 2nd floor, lucky for us. Once we get to the stairs, we both agree that he creeped us out, but we try not to judge and just let it go. Like a week or so later, we have a dog over. We go and walk him in the evening, and it was still light outside at this time. As we start to walk back to the building, we spot the creepy guy, and have to pass him because of the way he was walking. It was like he was moving in slow motion, not a care in the world, and again, with that satisfied, smug grin on his face. But that's not what creeped us out. Looking at his face, we realized that there was no way he was sober. He looked so out of this world, very noticeably on drugs. In that moment, the way he walked and the way he looked, I just got really wrong vibes from him. I did not want to be close to him at all, and again my stranger danger alarms were going off. This happened near the city center. My boyfriend and I decide not to walk back with him to the building, so we take another route just to avoid him. And we take our time to make sure that he's in his room before we enter the building. This is the creepiest part. I'll have to give you some background information. 3 weeks before our first encounter with this guy, someone randomly got murdered while he was jogging near the school campus. Stabbed. Died instantly. The suspect had been seen at the time near the campus, and so a drawing of said suspect had been released. But they didn't have him, and didn't really have anything else to work with. Now, just today, my boyfriend and I got back from his work at like 4 in the afternoon, when we noticed someone in a suit standing outside. Didn't really think much of it. Later that night, the guy who lives next door catches me as I just got back from the bathroom, and asks me if we already have a key to the front door. I say, yeah, we do, why? He said that the police had to break the door down, so he was in charge of getting everyone new keys. My boyfriend at this time joins us with the person who lives on the other side of us. I ask what happened. Apparently, the guy who killed the person near the campus lived on the 2nd floor. Legit, my hairs start standing up straight when I hear those words. I ask if he could have been seen, or how he looked. He told me he was tall, black hair with a weird mustache, and looks kind of dirty. It was the very same creepy dude. My boyfriend and I are still in utter shock that we lived so close to this murderer, someone who had walked around near the city center and cooked his dinner in the shared kitchen while he took someone's life. Someone that I had smiled to, said hello, and tried to avoid. So creepy murderer living in the same building, let's not meet again. I just had the scariest experience. I lost my ex over a year ago and had bought a Ouija board in desperation out of longing to communicate with him. I tried countless times, and it never worked, so I stored it away. Yesterday, my current boyfriend's good friend passed away. Suicide. I didn't know him very well. Today, I had a random thought to maybe try to communicate with him. I pulled out the Ouija board and asked to speak with him. It wasn't working until I closed my eyes, and then it started to move. It went to yes. I then asked it to give me a sign that it was really him. It went to the number 9. When I asked what this meant, it just kept going back to the number 9. As it's moving, I heard my cat hiss. I opened my eyes, and my cat was over the Ouija board hissing at it. My cat has hissed maybe twice in his entire life. I about pooped my pants and asked to say goodbye. I was already freaking out when I called one of my friends and they said 9 is an upside down 6. Now I am absolutely terrified. Ten years ago, when I was about 16, I started babysitting for a family that lived in my neighborhood. They had a sweet 7-month-old baby girl that I would babysit every now and then, and 2 dogs that were also very nice. Despite them having a nice house in a nice neighborhood, I still got a very weird feeling when I was in their home. It was almost like I was being watched or felt a presence there. Whenever I took care of the baby or their dogs, I would never want to spend longer there than needed. One night while babysitting her, about 2 years old, she asked to go down to their basement to play with Play-Doh. I said yes, and we went downstairs. I got a very weird feeling when we went down there, but I still got out the Play-Doh for her. We were playing for about 2 minutes before she came over to me and said that she was scared. I asked why she was scared, and she said that the man was scaring her. I said, what? Because I thought that I had heard her wrong the first time, and she said very clearly, the man is scaring me. She then asked to go upstairs, and I said yes, and she bolted and ran up the stairs and left me to clean up the Play-Doh. About 6 months after that, the family asked me to care for the dogs while they were out of town, and I said yes. I ended up burning some sage and asking the spirit to leave the space. After that, I didn't feel the presence as strongly. It was to this day such a weird experience, and I still have no explanation for why that all happened. When I was 16, I started dating this 20-year-old. It was a very bad relationship in which I was cheated on and treated like crap, but that's another story. Anyway, after my 17th birthday, I finally dumped him and got him to leave me alone. A couple months later, I was on Skype with one of my old friends around 1 a.m. All of a sudden, I hear tap, tap, tap on my window. Now, my bed is right next to, kind of underneath my window, and my bedroom is on the other side of the house from my parents. I asked my friend if he had heard anything, and he said no. A few seconds later, tap, 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 and he said yeah, that he had heard that. I agreed, ended the Skype call, and ran to my parents' room. I woke my mom up, and after telling her why I woke her up, she stopped being angry, and we tried to see if anyone was outside the house. No dice. So I slept in my parents' bed with them. At 17. The next day, my dad had apparently seen vague shoe prints outside my window. It happened twice more, and after the third time, my mom called the non-emergency police line and was suggested to put up a motion light and/or a security camera. We put up a motion light that day. I've yet to hear knocking on my window since the light was put up, and it's been 2.5 years. I'm about 95% certain that it's my psycho ex, because he would come to my window between 1 and 3 a.m. when we were together sometimes and knock. Also, one of my friends who had mutual friends with my ex said that my ex was in the area. He lived about 30 miles away from me, the nights when the knocking happened. So for my cheating asshole of an ex, let's not meet again. This won't make sense until later in the story, but my brother's room is on the second floor of my house. He has a door that leads up onto the roof, and it's pretty high up, so there's no way to get up there. Anyways, this was when I was around 13 or 14. My twin brother got a Ouija board recently, and me and my friend always used it. One day we decided to play with it like usual, just because we were bored. My brother went into the shower, so it was just me and my friend in my brother's room. We started using the Ouija board, and nothing really happened. It starts moving, and I usually move it, or he does, because we were dumb kids. This time, I wasn't moving it, so I just assumed that it was him. For 5 minutes, nothing happened, but we started asking the spirit to do something to let us know that we were there. This is when it got weird. Outside the door in my brother's room, the one that leads to the roof, me and my friends started hearing humming and singing sounds. We got pretty scared, and kept asking questions to the Ouija board. After that, there was a subtle banging or tapping kind of noise. One of the drawers in the dresser behind us opened. We said goodbye, and put it away. Haven't used it since. Several years ago, I worked at a crisis unit for the acutely mentally ill. It was a 10-bed unit where individuals would come stay as a step-down from a psychiatric hospitalization or a diversion to prevent psychiatric hospitalization. I often worked alone on the weekends. One Friday evening, we received an admission, Michael. Background info was provided with the referral indicating a diagnosis of antisocial personality disorder and his recent release from prison after serving a sentence for murder. I completed the initial intake meeting with Michael, during which time he said some sexually explicit things to me. I made it clear that this was inappropriate and that confidentiality was limited and that the staff working on the unit as part of his treatment team would be privy to anything said in the interview or subsequent one-on-one sessions. He responded well to the redirection, which we finished the intake and I went about the rest of my shift until about 11 p.m. that night when he approached the office and asked if I was working alone. Luckily, at the time I wasn't alone, and I told him my male co-worker was in the adjoining office. After this encounter, I explained the situation to my coworker, who read my shift summary and decided to sit down with Michael and tell him that the way he was acting was not acceptable, and that he could risk being released from the program if it continued. The next morning, I was working alone from 8 to 4 p.m. Around 9 a.m., I went to wake up another client, Jeremy, to administer his medications. The room Jeremy was assigned to was at the end of the hallway, and he was actually slow to get up in the mornings. While I was knocking on Jeremy's door, Michael approached me to tell me that he didn't appreciate that I had shared the things he said to me with my male co-worker. I explained to Michael that he knew what he said was inappropriate, and that he knew anything he said to me would be shared with the rest of the treatment team. Michael became more agitated, and got in my face, backing me into the corner in front of Jeremy's bedroom door. At this point, Jeremy had woken up and heard what was happening outside of his room. He came out, stood between Michael and myself, and told Michael that he needed to walk away and cool down. Michael went back to his room, and I contacted my supervisor, who told me to document the encounter and continue my shift. Needless to say, I left that job shortly after this incident. I'm thankful for Jeremy, and that he had the presence of mind, while also being a client with a mental illness, to intervene on my behalf. I often wonder what would have happened if Jeremy wouldn't have woken up, or if he would have been in a more severe state of mental illness and would have become more agitated as well. Michael, let's never meet again. This happened when I was young, around 7 to 8 years old. I was napping in my room that I shared with my younger brothers. Our bedroom consisted of only 3 mattresses put on top of 2-inch wooden panels and a child-sized wardrobe. There was also a floor-to-ceiling window that was strictly for decoration and couldn't be opened. When I woke up from my nap, my babysitter, she was a live-in, was folding our clothes. I talked to her for a while, and then went out to get a water. I don't remember what, but I needed to talk to her after, so I went in again. But she wasn't there. I remember thinking that it was weird. There had been no sound of any closing or opening of doors in the 5 minutes when I had left the room to go get the water. I proceeded to ask every person in the house if they had seen her. None of them did. So I went inside the room for a second time, thinking maybe she somehow was just hiding for some reason. But I still couldn't find her. I went out again and searched the house, before eventually going back to the bedroom for a 3rd time, and there she was, sitting in the bed, folding clothes like nothing had happened. I asked her where did she go. She replied, and I quote, "What are you talking about? I was here the whole time. I was shouting at you and asking you why you kept going in and out of the room, but you didn't answer me." She thought that I was pulling a prank on her, and I got reprimanded. There are still a couple of other incidents that happened around her, and to this day, I can't explain it at all. So basically, me and my friend were messing around until he informed me about a part of the web so messed up and dangerous that it's illegal. I kinda thought he was bluffing, but asked to see anyway. I can't remember how he got there, but somehow he did, because he said he went on there for laughs and gags. When we got on there, everything seemed normal, until he started to see things with titles like military-grade lasers or military-grade integral silencers. As we got further in, we started seeing more things like drugs, and of course more illegal weapons. We finally just quickly scrolled through stuff since we didn't really see anything that piqued our interest, till we came across a website or something titled Daycare for Kids. When we clicked on it, we saw what looked to be a room covered in feces and blood with a caged mic in the middle. We got so scared, we closed out of the browsers as fast as possible and never went back. A few years ago, my mom was sleeping downstairs, and she had an encounter with something inhuman. Anyways, I used to always get scared at night, and I would knock on their door to sleep with them. And one night, my mom heard a knock on her door, and she assumed it was me, so she said, "Come in," while still half asleep. She heard the door open, and heard something quickly patter across the ground and jump on the bed, and it began whispering in her ear and mimicking her voice. She freaked out, and opened her eyes, only to see a very skinny, small, webbed-looking creature running out of the room. Me and my dad awoke to her screaming. We believe the house was haunted because we all had paranormal experiences there. We believe it came to be haunted because the previous owners performed satanic rituals, etc. When I showed her that skinwalker picture that kind of went viral, she said they looked really similar. But we don't know if this was a skinwalker or a malvoyant spirit.